8th, 2024. It is 6:02 p.m. I'll call this meeting of the Barre City Council to order. First item on the agenda are there any adjustments to the agenda? Yes.
The Jedi Committee would like to go before C on the agenda.
Is that, I'm sorry.
The amendments.
How about we move you up to B on the agenda and we get you out of here really quickly? Yeah, we have a public hearing warned for 6:15, but I can get you on right after that. You got it.
It definitely has relevance. And when I saw the agenda, I thought it would be perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Not at all. Anything else, Mr. Manager?
None for me.
Council? No, nothing else? Okay, then we will move to item 3 on the agenda, which is visitors and communications. Is there anyone wishing to address the council regarding an item not on the agenda? Yes, Mr. Anthony.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Council. Just a quick urging. I was at a event this past week at the Labor Hall, sponsored by Let's Grow Kids. It reminded me how valuable expanded childcare is for the economic vitality and redevelopment of the city. And I just want to urge the council as they move ahead with redevelopment projects that they bear in mind that this is a huge attractant to new young families, and frankly will help people displaced by the floods to use the vastly increased state support for expanded childcare capacity and higher standards and higher compensation. So I hope anytime you get a proposal to discuss that you will remember to ask, by the way, is there childcare capacity built into your project? Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else under visitors and communications? I don't see. Oh, Amy Gelford.
Hi, I'm sorry I missed a couple meetings that were more focused on the flood relief stuff. I just wanted to mention about the Berlin Street Bridge. The river consultant folks had actually met with Danielle Ozarski and me separately about, they wanted to follow up with some questions about comments we had made during other city council meetings. And so they talked to us a bit, and that was the first time I heard about them raising the issue of completely removing the Berlin Street Bridge. You know, they kind of asked me about, well, what was it like when the bridge was closed for all these months? Was that okay? And that sort of thing. And would that be viable to just take the bridge out entirely? And I said, well, that's not my call to make, you know, that would need to be a broader question. And so I was a little surprised when that showed up as like, not just figure out what to do about the Berlin Street Bridge, but remove it as kind of the top item, but I may have missed some of the discussion on that. So I think with that, I would just say, I think it needs to be kept in mind that's a designated route to the hospital. You know, when you're coming past Cumberland Farms and RK Miles, you know, there's the big blue and white H for turning to the hospital that way. And living in this neighborhood, there's a lot of emergency vehicle traffic. So I hope the police and fire have input about their use of the Berlin Street route in order to get to the hospital or to get up towards Prospect Street and Berry Gardens in that area. So just, I think having some input from them. It's also a school bus route. It's a Green Mountain Transit route. VTrans, I think, takes a big interest in it. So I'm kind of surprised they would be okay with that. As I understand it from when the Transportation Committee was meeting and when we had some neighborhood meetings back in 2019, when Mayor Herring was running those, we talked a lot about Berlin Street issues, and Peter Anthony and Bill Ahern talked about how at one point there had been an experiment with one-way traffic on Berlin Street and the pros and cons of that. But we certainly at that point didn't talk about removing the street entirely. But I remember it's a pretty heavily traveled road. I don't know if it's in the top 10, but I think it's in the top 15 in the city. So that would be a big impact for a lot of commuters. And I don't think very many people are aware that that's being proposed. So I would encourage some more public feedback on that, like make sure the fire and police are okay with it. Make sure commuters know that that's being proposed and if they're okay with it, because I really have a hard time seeing Blackwell Street as an alternative for that, given the condition and the way it is driving through Blackwell Street and Smith Street right now. And also Smith Street tends to flood when we have a lot of rain as well. So unless that gets resolved, we're rerouting traffic onto an area that also floods. So that's just my belated 2 cents on that.
Thank you, Amy. We appreciate your comments, and we will keep them in mind as we move forward with our North End plan, so thank you for that. Anyone else under visitors and communications? Okay, don't see anyone, so we'll move on to item 4, which is the consent agenda. Council, you got the approval of the minutes of the meeting of September 24th, 2024. There are no licenses and permits to issue. Authorize the manager to execute the contract for the BOR lighting that was in your packet, and also designate the manager as voting delegate at the VLCT, passive, and VERB annual meetings, and that appointment would be effective until revoked.
So
So we
moved.
don't have to do it annually. Thank you very much.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion or questions? Yes, ma'am.
I have a few very small edits to the minutes, and I've shared them with Cheryl, our city clerk. One is Bern is B-E-R-N, and there's I think there's just a copy there's text that I think was from the last set of minutes because it was referring to the upcoming budget vote. And then I also said that we need to add, I think we specifically need to add about findings in the minutes, because I think that's what keeps us out of hot water when we go into executive session and we have findings. So I just made those. Oh, and I think Counselor Chambel's name may be misspelled in the executive session portion. And that is all. Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. So you make those changes? Okay, we'll incorporate those into the minutes and into the motion in the second. Is there any other discussion or questions? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion as presented, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, thank you, and online, thank you very much. Council, item 4A is to approve the city warrants, ratify the week of October 2nd, 2024, and approve the week of October 9th, 2024.
So moved. Second.
Moved and seconded, thank you very much. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion as presented, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, and abstention is noted, thank you very much. And we're almost there. I think we can squeeze in the city clerk and treasurer's report before our hearing.
Really brief, we have received many ballots for the general election back at our office. Some of them are for legitimate reasons, people moving out of state, people moving to other cities. However, there were quite a few that, and we're still waiting on the postmaster from Barre City to clarify why these particular ballots were not delivered, but they have complete addresses on them. We just need to know if it's something in the address or is it the fact that these individuals do not live there anymore. So until then, we're just going to work our way through notating those who have been received and have been removed from the checklist due to being moved out. Other than that, that is what we are doing in our office.
Thank you. Questions? Yes.
So for someone who hasn't received a ballot, the ballot might be sitting in your office?
We actually have had 3 people today come in and ask where their ballots were, and they were in that selection of ballots.
So if
And
someone's
their
missing
addresses.
one,
2 of them, the individuals had moved
okay.
from one part of the city to the other. One, her address was exact as what was on the envelope.
So is this a post office problem?
We don't know yet.
So if someone
Clarification.
hasn't received their ballot yet, they
Please
should
call us.
contact.
Please, yes, they're all now alphabetized and entered in the system, and we would gladly get them out to you.
Super. Yes.
Can you just tell me what the number is, how many that you have in this position?
Well, considering we haven't finished resolving the ballots that have addresses, and we're just not quite sure why they weren't delivered, but I want to say at least 400.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a slog. Good luck.
Interesting. We have the former city clerk here. Has I don't recall this happening to this magnitude.
It did in 22.
In 22 it did?
Less of a problem in 2020 because the world was shut down and everybody was getting things by mail. But we did have quite a glut of undeliverable ballots. And we did the same kind of thing. We alphabetized them. We had them available. We took them to the polls with us on election day, and a lot of people came through, and we checked and gave them their ballots from there. Anything that came with a change of address label that was within the city, we mailed them back out again. So we did exactly what Cheryl's doing as far as trying to mash them up and get them to where they need to be.
And how was the end result? Was there anyone who complained after the election that they didn't receive their ballot and that somehow dissuaded them from thinking they weren't going to get one, or?
Didn't get any complaints. There are steps in statute for if somebody comes into the office and says, I never got their ballot, and it isn't in the undeliverable return, they can sign an affidavit of no ballot voted, and then they get a ballot. The same thing happens at the polls. They can sign an affidavit and then be able to vote. So there are multiple ways to allow a voter to vote if things have gotten hung up in the mail or whatever.
So it all worked out, basically. Okay. That's the most important thing to hear. Thank you very much. Council, we are at 6:15. I'm going to move to item 8A on the agenda. This is a public hearing warrant for 6:15 p.m. This is the TIF substantial change. Ms. Dawes, how are you?
I'm fine. How about
You look
all
so
of you?
relaxed. Not relaxed? Relaxed. Not relaxed? Relaxed.
I find I'm dealing with other stuff instead, kind of like this.
There you go.
I know all of you know, but for the public too, I have been retained as the TIF administrator by the city of Barre because I can spell TIF. That was the only qualification. And so I continue to work on TIF-related projects. I'm not going to go into a tremendous amount of detail because it's all covered here, but essentially, Barre City's TIF district was approved by VEPSI in 2012, by the voters in 2013, and before we bonded before we did the first bond and had what were considered the initial expenses in January of 2014, there were two pieces of property the city was buying, and they had put deposits down on those, real estate deposits down on those, one for $7,500, one for $5,000, for a total of $12,500. That should have been, it was paid out of the capital fund and should have been reimbursed to the capital fund from the TIF bond during the life of the bond before all those funds were spent, and it never was. And the accountants, the auditors, when they were doing their audit a couple of years ago, came across this and created a due to, due from that we're here to settle. I have been in touch with the Vermont Economic Progress Council, VEPSI, who oversees TIF, about the proper way to use TIF increment funds to reimburse the capital fund. That is allowed, but we need to go through the substantial change process, which means we had to run a notice for this public hearing in the newspaper at least 15 days ago, and you have a copy of that in your packet. Once we hold this public hearing and council votes to authorize submitting the substantial change to VEPSI, I will prepare that document and packet of materials and send it to them. I will attend their next board meeting to bring them up to speed on this. Hopefully they will approve it and we will be able to make the transfer and make the capital fund whole. So if anybody wants additional details, I'm happy to give them, but that's it in a nutshell.
Thank you. So a motion would be appropriate at this meeting, at this hearing.
Correct.
So would anyone care to make that?
It is a public hearing, so an opportunity for the public or the council to ask any questions or make any comments, and then council action.
Thank you. Anyone have questions or a motion?
So moved.
Thank you. And a second, please? It's moved and seconded. Is there any discussion from members of the public or members of the council?
It sounded maybe like someone on Zoom had something
where
to
did
say, but
It might have been a motion.
yeah, I wondered,
Oh,
but
I don't see any hands.
yeah, there was just a brief sound, so.
Okay,
There was some.
I'll call a second time. Would anyone care to make a comment? This is a public hearing. You've heard the motion, which is to approve the submission of a substantial change to VEPSI. Is there anyone wishing to comment on that or discuss that? So I don't hear anyone, see anyone. Council, oh,
Could I just ask a clarifying question?
sure.
So for the $7,500 payment, it's being paid to Ormsby, and that is not but that's who it was originally to?
Originally
Correct.
was.
That
That was,
wasn't the name of the seller, so I was confused about that. And I realize that has nothing to do with it, but it's just like, why is it indicating that it was for Ormsby?
they were the seller of the property that we
Oh.
purchased over on Keith Avenue.
But this says,
Or
because
over
that's
on
an L,
Pearl
but
Street.
it says it's an LLC is the name of the seller in this document.
Yes.
Correct. That was the seller of the parcel that the city purchased. The general fund tendered the earnest deposit on behalf of the city, and that came from the general fund. And as the former clerk said, now that the general fund needs to be made whole because they were not made whole from the TIF bond.
I understand all that. I'm just confused about this, but I guess that's that ship has sailed, and so I'm just trying to understand it, but I'll ask that question after to try to.
Are you, Counselor Spalding, are you looking at the check? Are you looking at the purchase and sales agreement?
I'm looking at the settlement statement,
Okay.
and there's a box at the top in red that says settlement statement for purchase of 12 Keith Ave, showing $7,500 option paid to Ormsby 10/4/13. And the name and address of the seller is Gerald W. Osterman, something LLC. And when I look at oh, it's the same thing on the other one. There's money, but that was to, the seller was to Trono Oil
Trono
and
Gas and Company, yeah. Oil
I
and
don't
gas.
know how or why I remember this stuff, because it was so long ago, but the very fact that I remember it is sad to me, because I should remember better things. The reason it was Gerald Osterman LLC is, as I recall, the seller affected a Code Sections 1031 exchange, and Osterman LLC was the qualified intermediary in that transaction.
Okay. Because I was just like, it doesn't like make sense. There's like, where
No,
did
I get it,
Ormsby
because
come
the
from?
seller didn't, the receiver of the funds didn't match up with the seller. So now I understand exactly what your question was, and it's
Okay.
because the seller employed a qualified intermediary who facilitated Code Section 1031 exchange.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. Any other discussion or questions, comments? All those in favor of the motion as presented, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, council, we are going to move to item, we had nothing under liquor or cannabis control boards, correct? Mr. Manager.
Thanks, Mayor. A couple updates for council. The use of the Holden Road lawn waste site in the town has been extended. They have extended hours. So the regular hours are Saturdays 8 a.m. to 12 p.m. and Tuesdays 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. And they've extended those to be Thursdays from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. Actually, the Saturday hours in October will go from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. and Sundays will be 12 to 4. That's a lot of numbers I'm throwing at you. Just go to the website and Facebook, there'll be a flyer out tomorrow. But the good news is, lots of hours for people doing yard work to get rid of their yard waste up at the town, which this is our first year of full season use of the town waste site, which I think was really good for both communities. So we'll have a flyer up, like I said, tomorrow on the website and Facebook for people who want to get their yard waste disposed of. The FEMA DRC has closed on the Hill, so if you had been looking for them or were planning to see them, they are no longer up there. We will be working with CVRPC on trying to work with other communities on the hydrology study. So this was a topic from last council meeting. We'll be tapping into our regional partners to see how we can make that happen. So we'll be coming back to you hopefully soon with finality on that project. And then finally, we are looking for cashiers and skate guards at the BOR with ice season around the corner. We need cashiers and skate guards for open skates, cashiers for stick and pucks. So we have reached out to the high school. This is a great opportunity for kids who need their community service hours, or if they want to get paid, they can get paid too, $16 an hour. So we will be, we have a couple folks from last year who may be interested in doing it, but we're always looking to have a good bench of people who will take on those jobs. So we will have flyers out for those also in the morning, but we reached out to the high school and the superintendent to see if they have avenues to get to kids who are looking for those kinds of opportunities. So that is it for me.
Thank you very much. Questions? Yes.
A question about, I saw a question, I think it was on social media about or maybe it was from Porch Forum, about the bond vote. Do we have information about that posted on the website?
So I'm working on a letter to the editor that will go out and it will be simultaneously put on the website and Facebook. We have, so we're working with Aldrich Elliott as the engineering firm. They also work as part of what they do. They create some informational materials that they're working on as well to get that posted. So the most immediate thing that'll be coming out is that letter to the editor, which should be in the paper, hopefully by the end of this week, and certainly on the website sooner than that.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, hearing none. Council.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor.
Oh, sorry.
Yep, no, all good. Nicholas, when that letter is ready, could you also just email it to the council and we could put
absolutely,
it on
yeah.
our social media pages, or if we get emails from constituents, we just have easier access to send that back
Happy
to
to.
them. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Council, we'll move to item 8B on the agenda. This is issuing a charge to the JEDIB committee. Ms. Mulvaney, how are you?
I'm well, how are you?
Doing good, thanks. Thank you for including that, and so we could include it in our packet.
Well, I'm happy to be here. I see some new faces, not to me personally, but as council members. So there may be some things that have gone on in the past or been accepted in the past you're not aware of, so feel free to ask any questions you need to ask. It's good to see you all this evening. I want to thank you for allowing the committee to come, not allowing, for giving us time on this agenda, to the council and to others who have contributed to our committee's progress. So I have sent a couple of items. Our committee has been operating now, I think it's actually 4 years. I can't even believe it, 4 or even 5, I'm not sure. I think it was 2019, but I don't remember the exact date. In any case, there's a lot that we have learned and a lot that we have discovered, not only about ourselves, but also about the city and our relationship with the city. So this report that we put out is also our ideas for work plan. When we began, as you know, we had 2 charges. One was to create a flag policy, which we did. And then the other was to go through the various ordinances, policies, procedures in the city with an eye toward, with a lens toward equity, which we sort of floundered at because really, of all the committees that the city has, I think this one is perhaps the most abstract in terms of what our possibilities are, which also means that we're open to doing a whole lot of things. With 7 people, however, I think that's pretty much impossible to expand our scope. So we wanted to do something different this time in terms of a response from council. So in the past, we have brought reports and things to you, and it's never really required, or there hasn't been any motions about it. But in this case, this has to do with a charge that we've kind of come to. So one of the charges is, one of the things is to divide into 2 work groups. Because in order for us to really be useful to the municipality and to leadership, we really need to figure out ways to have interactions that are useful. And I can describe to you how that could happen. First of all, the first thing we did was we needed some kind of criteria to use in order to do an examination of any kind. And so we went to the state, who hired some very top-notch professionals in the field, because none of us are professionals in this field, who came up with a Vermont equity assessment tool, which we adopted 3 years ago. The city council voted and adopted it as a tool to use within the city. The other thing is, how does it get used? And do people need help? Help with it? So one of the committees that, one of the working groups that we're proposing here is specific to looking through the various ordinances, policies, and procedures using this tool, and also promoting using this tool by the agencies and, the municipality. And a good example of that is DPW manager Brian Baker employed the tool when he was, this was a couple of years ago, maybe a year ago, when he was planning the street sweeping project. So, and he used our committee as help as well. So we didn't just hand this tool to him and he went through it. We actually gave a tutorial on how to use it so that he was able to use it to do this plan. The plan is actually, the tool is on our website, the city's website. So if you don't know about it, take a look. It's about 25 questions to ask whenever you're either proposing something or looking at some kind of process. So the way it's a little daunting because people think, oh, I have to actually do all these things, but that's not the case. The case is really about using the tool as much as you can, and then if once the project happens or someone comes and says, I question this or whatever, you can look back at the tool and say, yeah, because they didn't do a community survey in the neighborhood, that's why this has come up. So it's not a mandate to actually respond, because some of the questions are they're specific. Did you consider the neighborhood, or did you talk to people in the neighborhood, or what kinds of processes did you use to connect with neighborhood? It doesn't mean you actually have to do it, but if you didn't do it, you say, no, I didn't. And then when something comes up later, we can use that as a tool for correction or a tool to understand whatever the repercussions might be. The second way, so I've been talking with Nicholas about this too, is we need some kind of mechanism between us so that we can be useful. And this is the whole point. We need to be useful to the city. That's why we're doing this. And so one of the things that we were thinking about is there's two ways I think that we can be the most useful. One, obviously, is to do this work with the policies and work with the council and with other leadership on whatever changes need to be made. And the other is, there is a lot of nonprofit organizations who serve our community. And in order to get their grants, they need to come to you and they need to ask for your signature on their grants. So another way is to ask them to use this tool in order to examine the type of project they're doing and what kind of impact it might have in terms of equity. The joy of that part is, I mean, I attended the summit, the economic summit, this past year, and every single person there representing an organization was representing a nonprofit. When we held our workshop there were 12 people in the workshop, all from those nonprofits. They were keen on this topic of equity. They've all been trained very well by their own agencies. So it's a perfect opportunity to connect with them and have them apply their learning and their knowledge to this tool. And the benefit for them is, if they use this tool, they send it to our committee, and the city's ready to sign it, we can send a letter of support saying our DEI, or whatever you want to call it, our JDIB committee approves of this, some sort of approval for this grant. That would benefit the nonprofits. It would also benefit the city if the city does applications as well. So, so the two things that, the second thing that we realized right off the bat was, because it's such an abstract idea and it's so new to so many people, education would be really key to bringing the community along and also bringing the council along and other leadership. When I use the word leadership, I don't mean just you guys. I mean anyone who steps up to responsibility for anything. That means anyone who volunteers for a committee, such as myself or all my committee members. It means really anyone who is working, especially as a volunteer for the city. That's my definition when I use it. So the education piece was a little trickier because there's lots of trainings out there. You can do them online, et cetera, but the one thing we recognize within our own committee is the most important thing is developing relationships with each other and being able to talk about difficult topics. That was primary. That's something that we really worked hard on. We found, gloriously, Christy Clemens, who was the Title IX director for Dartmouth College. And with her help, we crafted a curriculum that is just that, conversations with each other, with her as being the facilitator. And there are 3 people in this room who actually participated. So if you'd like to hear them respond to its efficacy or it's the way that they felt about it or how useful they think this tool might be, that's the other thing we wanted to continue. So there are 2 committee proposals. One committee is, we're calling it we can call it anything we want, but for these purposes, I believe I called it which might actually scare you, a reform committee, talking about looking into the ordinances and those kinds of things. So there would be a committee that is set to do that, and they would use the equity assessment tool in order to do that. And then the other committee is an education committee. Because we're so few right now, that would mean continuing this program of let's talk about equity, justice, diversity, inclusion, and belonging. But of course, we're just titling it the Education Committee. It can mean other kinds of ways of educating the community about it as well. So that's the report of the committee. And I'm not going to ask necessarily for a motion to accept our work plan now. You might want some time to think about it, but I would like you to do so by the end of November. That way we can move forward with this plan. I want to talk now a little bit about criteria for committee appointments, because this is also very important. In order for us to be useful to you, in order for any committee to be useful to you, we need to have skilled people on the committee. When I first moved to the city, I think his name was Mr. White. Mr. White was a forester, and he was our city, I think we called it a tree warden. We have no one now that does that, but at that time it was him. I have experience working with city planners before I came to the city, both in Vermont and New York City, and I was on the Planning Commission because I had those skills. I was happy to volunteer. So when we appoint people to committees, I think it's important for us to understand, first of all, what the committee needs are, and secondly, if the person applying can meet those needs or has the skills to help. So skills and/or professional level experience should align with the specific needs of each committee. I'm talking now not just about our committee, but you can certainly use our committee and this appeal to you as a kind of springboard for thinking about the ways that you might want to interact with other committees. I think that training for committee members is important to improve their ability to serve the community. And I'm not sure other committees have charters or don't. I know that our charge was very limited, and now we've realized how we can change that charge in order to make it useful to you all. Here's the other thing, and this has been a frustration from the beginning for me. We need people who will read things that are sent from the chair. We need people who can respond well. It's not just, the only criteria now is you would have to leave the committee, a committee, if you miss 3 meetings in a row. Doesn't talk about what kind of value the person has to the committee. And I mean, this is, to me, being on a committee like this is not a political appointment. It's a job. It's a job that we're volunteering for. So I think it's important to begin to think about what kinds of specific criteria that you are going to use in order to accept people to different committees, and listening to the committee itself. I noticed it's in your revised, it is here where you talk about asking the chair for some direction, which is okay, except what happens if, and I know you're also changing the idea about the timing so that we don't have to wait a whole year until someone else comes onto the committee, which is also very good. Because you never know when someone's going to leave the committee. And when committees are so small, we're all pretty, we're stretched pretty thin. So it's the ability then to meet those criteria that we set, or that you set, that should be able to allow us to figure out a process to remove people from committees when they're not meeting those criteria. It's kind of simple. And it doesn't mean just attending 3 meetings. It means other things. It means, are you doing the work that the city is expecting us to do? Yeah, so we need a removal process that's fair and objective. And we also need clear committee requirements. And they might be different for different committees. Obviously, they would be. Some would be the same. Attend meetings, respond to communications, whatever. But then some are real specific. I wouldn't have a clue how to deal with the BOR. And so that certainly wouldn't be something that I would put in our basket. So these are the recommendations I'm making, that we're making, aside from asking you to accept our work plan. And any questions?
Council, yes.
I'm a little concerned about possibly having an echo chamber, having people that are of the same like mind, and maybe potentially not including people that don't have that same mindset or skill set, that someone's tools to belong, essentially. I'm really concerned about how we're not looking at this to open it up to everyone. What I feel like on this committee is that we have people that have varying different viewpoints, and I haven't really seen everyone get along. And I feel like what's happened in my time on council is that those that don't have the shared viewpoint are chastised, are threatened with being muted, been threatened with being kicked off committees. Now I'm concerned of this continuing forward, and what it looks like from your point of view, Madam Chair, the people that are on the committee may not have the tools that you're looking for them to have. So I'm really curious what those tools would be, or skill sets that somebody would need to belong on that committee.
They're fairly simple.
Okay,
They need to be able to read documents.
sure.
They need to be able to sustain interest in things like research. They need to be open to trainings themselves and participate in the trainings that we actually created and provided. I think those types of things are what I would think about. I am a little flummoxed here because perhaps you haven't been paying as much attention recently as the past.
No, I haven't because I haven't
Because
had
we-
that opportunity, ma'am.
That's okay, I'm just explaining to you.
Sure.
I understand, we're all busy.
Listen,
Yeah. So I think that if you polled the entire committee, they would all tell you that we have moved on from those early days. And those early days were actually also affected not just by our committee members within it. We were experiencing a great deal of negative pressure from outside the city, outside the state. So there were reasons that were never brought to light in public because of possible retribution, other things. There were things that leadership did as well, and here I'm talking about council, that were not supportive of us. In fact, not everyone thinks that racism is a problem in Barre. That's what I was told by a council member. Oh, there's no problem here because we don't have too many Black people. So it's those types of things that weighed heavily on us. I got death threats. You know this. I've talked to you about this before. And I've talked to council about this before. And this is the last time I'm going to talk about it because I've moved on and I'm hoping that others can too. This work still needs to be done regardless of who does it.
So just a couple of questions, and I'll ask the manager to jump in. So as we review ordinances, I mean, normally when staff reviews them, they go through a legal review as well?
They do, yes.
Okay, so this would be the same case, so it would go, I suspect, from the committee to your desk to the,
Yeah,
would that be fair to have it go to, you know, if there's something that the manager just objects to, rather than have it go from the committee to legal to the manager who doesn't like it. So now it's going back to the committee to legal again, and we end up with a lot of legal review time. So if you could just come up with a mechanism for
Right,
that, that would
exactly.
be.
My vision of this is a little more simple. It's more like, there's two ways. One way is if we're looking at, this is how we began. If we were looking at something for the first time, or I'll give you an example of the police, I forgot what they're called, the police, not commission.
advisory committee.
Yeah, them. When they were looking at their ordinances or their processes, policies, right? And then we participated by helping them go through with this tool. That's one way, when it comes up but not from us. The other is to actually go case by case, starting at the beginning, and we're working through all of them and using the same kind of criteria or the same tool on them. And then making a suggestion to you all, or if you want to do it through Nicholas, the city manager, that's fine. That process could just work pretty simply. So then we would look at it, let's say that happens, that we found in one of the ordinances that this little change here could actually address this inequity. And then we would propose something in writing to change it, or ask one of you to do that, because really that's your responsibility. We'd be happy to help do that, and then submit it to Nicholas, and then he brings it to you.
But you left out legal.
Yeah.
See, when we change our ordinances, always, we send it to the city attorney just to make sure that we haven't stepped in it by
I get
making, you know, there won't be
Absolutely.
unintended consequences to the change.
So
we
then I'm
always go through
assuming,
a legal review.
I'm assuming Nicholas that would share it with the attorney, and you guys figure it out beyond that.
Yeah.
And coming back to us, obviously, if it's something you say, well, you know, we're really struggling with this, could you reword it in a way that makes more sense, or whatever? You know, in other words, working more closely together about these things. That's my vision of how it could work.
Yeah, so I think this, I mean, in terms of, as you mentioned, there are two suggestions here to the council, two recommendations. I like the first one, the review of the ordinances. That's not going to take me long to consider. I've got to think a little bit about the second, because so many times, first of all, sometimes we struggle to find volunteers. That doesn't mean I've never believed that the council should accept anyone. If there is someone who, maybe they're not sincere, I wouldn't make that appointment. But if someone is sincere in wanting to learn, sincere in wanting to participate, but they may lack some of the skill sets, well, that's how we build tenure on committees. You know, I myself, when I've been appointed to tax committees or to the Liquor and Lottery Board, I didn't know the first thing about being a liquor, well, it was just liquor then, liquor commissioner. But I learned, and I hope, even though I recently stepped down from that board, I was the longest tenured commissioner, and I hope I brought value. But it took a while. I had to learn. So I just want to let you know that I'll be very aware of that as I try to judge the person. How sincere are they, and do they, maybe someone wants to be on the DRB or Planning Commission who really doesn't understand land use laws, but they're sincere in wanting to learn, and they're willing to put in the work, and they have a keen interest in that subject. I'd likely, you know, I'd look at the committee as a whole, but I would likely appoint them. And lastly, the removal process, I don't disagree that there should be a process for removal. It needs to be objective. I don't think it should be, as with most boards, when you look at the removal of a commissioner or a board member, it usually requires a 2/3 majority, something besides.
Unless you're on the planning commission. That was a joke.
Oh.
I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah, so it needs to be, you know, that's a pretty serious step to take,
Yes,
to ask for
absolutely.
someone's removal. So I would just want to make sure that it wasn't, you know, two members who didn't get along. I mean, on occasion, it's unfortunate that that happens, but on occasion, it does happen. And I'd want to make sure that it was more than one person versus another person, and that there was, in fact, substance, and that prospective removal was supported by the majority, probably a 2/3 majority of the committee. So I've got to think about, I don't disagree with you,
Right,
but I just have to think about how we might do that and do a little research myself.
We'd be happy to help because, you know, I mean, that's what we should be doing. That piece is separate, however, from, that's not an ask in terms of.
Oh, I understand.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I understand.
Yeah, and
No, but
also-
I'm taking your suggestions seriously,
I hear you.
and I can't but help, my mind starts worrying as I think, well, how would we do that? And then I also think about, gee, it wasn't that long ago where we were actually downsizing committees and combining committees because there wasn't enough interest. And I thought about some of the appointments I made where folks who were very sincere and have turned out to be very good members of committees sat right there and said, I have a lot to learn. I don't know a whole lot about this subject matter, but I'm willing to put in the time, and I really want to learn.
I hear you, but that's why a removal process would be helpful, because if a person who was sincere and really seemed eager to learn and then really didn't work out that way, I mean,
And it happens.
it does happen. So that's, but we have no process right now. So if and when it does happen, there's no process to use.
Right.
So that was that suggestion.
Counselor Spalding?
I served on this committee, and I also am the liaison, so I still attend the committee meetings, and I appreciate the work, and I appreciate this report, and I am in support of the two working groups. I also wonder, for your question about having criteria for committee appointments, if, and not just for this committee, but for every committee, what the expectation is, because there's no expectation of what committee members will be doing. You know, I originally applied to be on the Recreation Committee, and I'm not sure what that would actually entail, other than going to meetings, because there's no real explanation. And so I wonder if each committee would come up with their own expectation of what committee members would, what your role is, what your role is as a member of that committee. So when people are applying, they understand, we want you to be able to take the trainings and read and help us with these working groups, and that there will be outside meetings beyond the one meeting a month that we meet. And so I think if that's clearly spelled out and people are applying for it, even if they don't have any understanding of necessarily, justice, equity, diversity work, that would be okay, as long as they're willing to put in the effort and they're willing to try. It sounds like that's what you're saying.
Yeah, it is. And the other thing that is really on your side of the table is some way, I think people who volunteer, and certainly it's true of my committee members, people who volunteer want to be useful. That's why they volunteer. If they're not feeling used well, or their talents aren't being appreciated or whatever, they're not going to volunteer. And in our case, we can't get volunteers because of all the original bad press. People don't want to stand up, and that may not be the case of other committees, obviously, but it is for us. So recruiting other people to be on the committee has been difficult, and I'm hoping that with this change, making them working groups, that it makes it a little gentler for people to, because that's a whole different kind of setting. It's a little more, I don't know if private's the right word, but it's a little more focused. So, yeah. Oh, by the way, this is for you. When I was at a meeting, and this is what your first meeting with the new council and with you being mayor, you proposed making a priorities list. So that's why it's included here, because I thought that was a great idea, to have a priorities list. And maybe all committees need to have one. Our priority list, I don't want to scare you, that's not all things that we're going to do like right now. It's just, and it's not in a list of we have to do this and we have to do that second. It's really simply a way for us to look at, kind of map out in the future what some of our projects might look like. And so it's not that we're intending to do all of these things. We certainly aren't going to do anything without your permission anyway. It's just a way for us to look at some of the things that we think we need to be dealing with.
And yes,
I just want to, I think, build a little bit on what Councillor Spalding's has to say, which I think it is a really useful thing for us to consider what appointments to committees look like, and in doing so, provide more information, especially to people who are interested in being on committees. So I think part of this process, as we sort of re-envision the committees across the board, it would be really useful to say this committee will require 2 to 4 hours a week, additional reading, or I was able to attend my first meeting of the cow pasture committee as the council. That committee requires occasional hiking. So, and apparently I'm going to learn what buckthorn is. But those are useful things for people to know, because as you say, what exactly am I getting myself into here? I know I want to help, but in what ways will I be helpful and useful on this committee in terms of the hours commitment, in terms of the work that I would be expected to do? And I think this is part of why council is considering across the board the committees, so that they can be structured and useful and helpful. And I also wanted to build on, you had mentioned training for committee members. I think that would be a great part of the onboarding process. If every new committee member, every 6 months, my brain goes to like, what are the basics of Robert's rules? Because boy, there was a time in my life when that was like all Greek to me, and I bought myself a copy of the book and sat down and read it through, but like I had to go and do that. And there's a demystifying, I think, that can help people participate and provide access to people for that process. So I think those would all be great things for us to consider going forward, both to ask committees to include as part of their charges and their prospectus, and also for the city to consider. And I know that the manager had spoken a little bit about bringing our new project coordinator on to help sort of wrangle the committee process a little bit more. So I think some general light volunteer training across the board might be a useful part of that. Thank you.
Something else you might consider are some kind of perks for volunteers. Nothing that would cost us money necessarily, well, that would be nice too for some folks, I guess. I don't know, free pass to the pool, something, something that's reciprocity. Because although we want to help the city, it feels good when we get appreciated for it.
Understood. With some good suggestions. I mean, one of the questions I usually ask all appointees is, have you attended some meetings? Have you reviewed some minutes? Do you understand what they do? Do you understand I always ask if they understand the work requirement and they're committed to meeting that requirement. I've only had one person say no. Not to that question, we ended up appointing them anyway, but they actually had not attended. That's the only time it had happened in over a decade where someone said, no, I haven't attended one of the meetings yet.
Well, clarity is also, I like this idea about us, our committees being clear about what the expectations are, too. That's very important.
And even having a requirement that appointees have a conversation with the chair of the committee, just so they can ask questions, and that might be an easy way for the chair to say, yes, I did explain the time requirements. I did explain the level of commitment to them, and if we could just get something from the chair, and maybe some chairs may not want to, but the chair could even say, look, I had a very favorable impression of them and found their skill set useful, not perfect, but useful, and found them to be sincere. That might be helpful.
That sounds great. Thank you very much.
Yes.
And-
Sorry, one quick comment.
Sorry.
And Joellen,
Yeah.
we've talked about this, we know we don't exactly see eye to eye on it, but the last bullet on the ordinance is the review of RFPs. And we actually spent a lot of time talking about this at the Let's Talk with Christy, that,
Yes.
most, 99.99% of the things we're RFPing for are things like roofs,
Yes.
HVAC systems. So I tend to think that a lot of the valuable input we would get would be on, service delivery, and most of our RFPs are not that. It's equipment. We talked about it. I'm not sure there's a exact role there, because it's, like I said, it's not, in my view, there's no equity component there. Maybe there is and I'm missing it, but we talked a lot. I was in the Let's Talk session with Joanne, so I know we talked about this at length. I'm not sure that there's value in that piece. It may slow down things like roof repairs and HVAC, because the reality is we only RFP for things over $25,000, and those things tend to be mechanical, the lights at the BOR, right? Like there may be an equity component, maybe
Well, let me give you an example. So when you do make those contracts, there is a question on the tool that asks if whoever is using minority workers, something like that. Obviously it wouldn't work for everything, but there could be.
Well, we have ordinance that helps
We talked
incentivize
about- yeah,
that. So,
I know.
and that's, so there's ordinance that helps sort of trigger that as well. So for us, it's any contract above $200,000 will
Right.
trigger something like that. Now, it's an incentive, it's not a requirement, because, and, we went through that when we went with the ordinance, that it could, there just may not be firms that do some of that work that have that demographic of workers, but anyway, I just wanted to point that out for context, because we've talked about it at our
And we
sessions.
will continue, I'm sure.
Yes.
So if you want, I can stay through the next piece so that I can answer any questions if they come up about.
Thank you. Thank you for coming.
I think we're on to budget next.
Okay, council, we're at item 8C. I'm sorry? Oh, we're at item 8C on the agenda. This is the fiscal year
Right, yeah. the
25 budget update.
Correct. Yep. So let me share the screen here, and I'll get us started. Okay. There. Make sure. All right, there we go. So, thank you, Mayor. And yes, we're at the FY25 budget update. just starting with a look back to the budget we're operating with is a $14.8 million total expense budget. 10.1 million of that was to be raised by property taxes. Our budget included $246,000 in savings identified by staff, and it also included $1 million of state operating funding. So overall, we think that, thank the voters for considering the budget and approving, I think, a responsible budget that protected services after a really tough year. Just for, again, I like to show these slides for context setting about how, it is a difficult budget always to put together, and these are the two best ways to show it. The first is that most of our budget is fixed. So that large blue wedge of that triangle shows wages and benefits, which is about 2/3 of our expenses. Those are the costs for the people. So, and even if we broke it down further, the cost for the union folks versus non-union folks would be the vast majority of that as well. So we're people-heavy operation, police, fire, public works, and everyone in between who works in our offices, and it costs money, and it's reflected in where most of our expenses lie. This is, it's not unique to Barre. This is probably the same picture for most governments or government entities. The next wedge, that yellow wedge, is what we call our fixed costs, and that represents about 20%, 21% of our costs. And those are things that, for better or worse, we have little or no discretion. So that includes our debt service payments, includes insurance. We have to have vehicles and heating fuel to run our services. We have to buy sand and salt every year. And people like to email us and call us. So we have to have, we have to pay for contracts for an email service and phone. So those are things that we have to have to run a government. And then that smallest wedge up there is discretionary spending. Those are the things that we have some say over. That's something like the bulk waste, what I talked about earlier, the yard waste site. Those are things that we pay for that are not mandatory, not required, but are nice to have, and our residents also expect. And then this other picture also helps to draw, to set the context. And this is where we get our dollars. The last picture was where we spend them, and this is where we get them from. The large section here is property taxes and pilots. That's payments in lieu of taxes, and that's almost 3/4 of the budget of our revenue comes from local taxpayers. The next largest wedge is city-generated revenue. That's 20%, and that includes fees. It includes rentals at the BOR, things of that nature, permits, pool passes, things like that. And then the smallest wedge is federal and state assistance. And actually, this is a little bit almost misleading because this includes the $1 million. So normally this wedge is about, as you can see there, it's normally about 1%. It was 1% in FY24, and it's larger than that this year.
I'm sorry, just a brief question.
Yeah.
When the city receives grant funding for a particular project, is the revenue for that accounted under city-generated revenue, federal and state assistance, nowhere in there? None of the above?
It's in a different fund.
Got it, thank you.
Thank you. So, so this, together, these are, tough pictures. As you can see here, roughly 85% of our budget almost is pretty fixed. And so when we go through our budget exercises, it's tough to find savings because we're really working off of that discretionary spending wedge and trying to creatively do it within the other ones. And it's hard to, we don't have other sources of revenue. It's when we do have increased costs, a lot of it falls on the big blue wedge there, which is property taxpayers. The budget conditions for when we put this budget together were challenging. We were, these are arrows moving up and down for either expenses or revenues, and red is a bad color, and they're all bad. So 5%, approximately 5% contractual wage increases. That's for all of our collective bargaining agreements had roughly that percentage increase built in for this year. It was a 13% healthcare rate increase last year, which we're actually looking back fondly on because it's going to be 18% this year. We'll get to that in a second. We had a 497 in projected expenses increase, and this was referring to things like fuel rates going up, just escalators and contracts that we have for services that they just happen to go up 2%, 5%, whatever the case is. Those are just sort of built in to the budget that they just go up every year because of circumstance. So we were working with that. We had depleted our fund balance to pay for, we have to prepay our flood expenses, so our reserves were gone. And we had, of course, loss of grand list value to contend with as well. But the final budget math ended up being favorable thanks to that $1 million. We had, with the $246 in savings and the $1 million in state funding, the municipal tax increase ended up being very, very small, as you can see there. And just for reference, the savings that we're talking about were, delays of purchasing of equipment. We've actually reduced the number of printed annual reports, and I think we found the sweet spot there. We didn't have many left over last year, but that's a savings to us. And then we after sale of the Wheelock building, we stopped having utility payments there as well. So just to give you the snapshot of where we are as of today, this is simply a snapshot. We have collected, recognized $4.2 million roughly in our revenues for the year. That's about 28.5% of the budget. And this is we're right around at the quarter mark, so it's roughly 25% would be consistent with where we are in the year. And expense-wise, it's $2.7 million. Or about 18% of the budget. And you can see here the breakdown. Most of it, as I said, which makes sense, is personnel services are $2 million of that. And the OTPS, so anything, expenses other than personnel is a smaller chunk of it, with that service at about $260,000 thus far. This doesn't include flood expenses. We got approval at a recent council meeting to start us track that separately. So there's very, very minimal flood expenses reflected in these numbers, and those are here because they are non-reimbursable. It's $1,300. There's challenges for the upcoming budget cycle. As I alluded to earlier, we're expecting 18% projected increase in healthcare rates. That's on top of 13% last year, quickly becoming unsustainable. And we have a similar 5% projected increase in payroll costs. And again, that's driven by union contracts and the loss of the state operational funding. I mean, that was a one-year allocation. It helped us get through last year, but we know that it's going to create challenges for the future. And so that's going to, we have to dig out of that before we basically get back to zero in the FY26 budget. So we are, for the 26 budget development process, thank you to the council for moving town meeting day. I think that certainly helps us to create and craft a budget with more information and more data. So we're looking at the staff side, and talking to Don, that our staff piece will really kick off in January. We'll have a 6 months worth of data at that point. What we plan to do is similar to what we did last year, is we have sort of a council budget kickoff where we ask for your priorities, your targets, what we should be working towards. We go into a staff budget congress where we get in a room and with all the department heads, and we go, I know everyone says this and it's cliche, but we actually do it. We go line by line. Like it is every line in the budget gets scrutinized. It's a really healthy process. Everybody's contributing. Everybody's in the room to answer the questions as we go through there. We get to a point where we can brief you about, trends that we're seeing or how we're doing on progress towards the targets that you've set. In February, we'll also have our partner organizations come in that are funded in the budget to make their budget pitches, and that's the library, the Barre Partnership, and BADC. In March, we would be looking to do our additional council briefings, and then the council budget seminar, and then get you a near final document at that point early in that month. And then April 8th, based on our town meeting day of May 13th, April 8th is the day that we'd have to warn a budget for the voters to consider. So that's our thinking at the moment. You know, we really enjoyed work. You know, as tough as the budget was last year, we liked having the data. It really gave us some more information as we were getting things together, and I think we landed. You know, I think we're going to see that we're landing hopefully close on where our projections were. So that's what we see for now, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Yes.
Is there any hope that there'll be less than an 18% health charge on healthcare?
Always hope.
We received a letter from Blue Cross Blue Shield with that number. While they said it's, you know, small adjustment could be made, but
It could also be
It could also be
it could be
up.
greater
Yep.
also. Yeah.
If you look historically, the actual number, you know, there are regulatory agencies involved. The actual number ends up often being slightly less, but only slightly, you know, 1 or 2%.
Thank you.
It's going to be difficult, to say the least. Yes.
Two things. First, I think I'm reminded again of the importance of that $1 million in state funding that our representatives secured for us. So I'm grateful for that again. And also looking in your timeline, Manager, I don't think you have to call it back up. I'm just mentally referencing the timeline in my head. I would love to find space in there, and in when I was looking at that, I was thinking maybe February for presenting a working budget to city residents. I spent some time over the weekend with a friend of mine who's the deputy mayor in Winooski, Thomas Renner, and they did this really cool public presentation process where they had literal buckets where they were given $1 that represented 100%, and they could sort of parse out where do you think your tax dollars should go, and then could have an actual conversation about the various services that the city provided and offered, and understand the sort of trade-offs and the difficult decisions that have to be made. He offered to talk more about that with me and how they found that worked out, but he said, and on the whole, it ended up being a really, really good and thoughtful conversation with people. Now, I don't know what the exact format would be, but I would like to find some way to at least have a priorities conversation about that. I understand that lots of it's fixed and so on, but a priorities conversation with city residents. And sort of tentatively thinking February might be a good time for that when you've gotten a first pass through, but.
Yeah, I think we could probably, maybe we can schedule a meeting at Alumni Hall during a regular meeting and just, you know, and at a bigger location, or the Labor Hall, whatever the case may be, something bigger where we can run something like this. And I you know, you mentioned it, the challenge is that so much of it is fixed, right? So people will say, cut this, cut that, add this, add that, and the reality is that we're bound in so many ways by obligations one way or the other for the expenses we have. But yeah, we can, we will make sure that's worked in.
Any other questions?
I
Comments?
wanted to point out that I noticed I forgot on my notes under the revenue section is the $1 million, if you remember, we got that in actual fiscal '24, so it's in our fund balance. So it's not recognized in that 4 million in revenue right now. Just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you. Appreciate that update. Thank you. Council will move to item 8D. I'm sorry, it says 8C. I'm skipping it because we changed the letters. So now it's what is 8C on your original agenda became 8D. Amend the municipal bodies and appointments policy. Council, you did receive a one-page briefing as well as the proposed amendments to the policy. Would you like to review it?
Sure, I'm happy to give some high-level comments on it. So the real rationale for bringing this to you was, you may remember last June, well, last May it would have been, when appointments were going on. There were some volunteers who had raised some particular concern or objections, I don't know what you want to call it, to having to come in to do the interviews. I think that that is a barrier for some people who've been long-term volunteers. So that, it just stuck with me as we got to this next cluster of volunteer appointments, which are coming in the next couple of weeks, that it might be time to look through the policy and maybe try to find ways to strike a balance between, recognizing opportunities for new people to volunteer versus also recognizing that there may be times when long-serving volunteers may not need to come in. So that was the real impetus for going through the policy, but if we were going through it, I figured it was worth making some additional edits. You'll see a lot of red line in here. Part of it is that sometimes, and this is just maybe my own stylistic thing, there's things in here that talk about policy encouraging or not encouraging. I think it's easier if a policy says a little bit more black and white. I just think it adds confusion if it encourages something without requiring it. There was also conversation about residency requirements in the context of charter changes considered last year. There's some language here that's for your consideration, which I think also tries to strike somewhat of a balance, which basically says that, that residency is not required, which I think was the consensus of the council at that point, but that when there are 2 or more otherwise qualified non-incumbent individuals who apply for an insufficient number of seats, preference would be given to the qualified city resident. So that's, again, it's a thought to try to strike a balance on a debate that had come before the council. And I think I'm going through this here. Is anything more substantive? Just for, for the public, the change I made to the interview process was that if there is a candidate who is an incumbent and there's no competition for that seat, that they can be reappointed with a, letter of support from the chair. So that sort of, tries to recognize that it's somebody who's long-serving and, if they have the support of the chair, that, they can be spared the trip into the council. So other than that, I'm trying to scratch my head if there's anything more substantive. If there is, I'm happy to answer questions about it, but that was really the impetus for just bringing this to you at this time.
Yes.
I had one under section 5, council interviews and appointments. You had struck language around manager will include timely applications in the council's meeting materials. Was that language incorporated somewhere else and I missed it? Or
No, I thought it almost seemed redundant of the packet process. So every time that you would have a counselor, an application, they would be in the Friday packet. So we can keep it in there. It's just part of the common practice to have all the resumes and applications in the packet. So.
I mean, if you're comfortable with that being an understood part of the
Yeah.
packet preparation and don't need it to be called out in here, I'm comfortable
Yeah.
with that. I just wanted to make sure we keep
Yeah,
that.
absolutely. Yeah, it was basically just that part of our entire process with this is, we'll actually have a good trial run next council meeting because we have our next cluster. So you'll see that the agenda will have the interviews lined up and it'll have their application materials that's submitted. So council would always have it at least as part of the packet.
Councilor Spaulding?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. One, regarding the residency shall not be required, I was lobbying the council, before I was on the council, to have residency be required. I've since walked that back, recognizing that some of the things that some of the committees are more regional. I mean, justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging shouldn't just be Barre City, the recreation department, for instance. But there are 2 committees that I think should be. I think one is in statute that it needs to
The
be.
DRB does need to be, yeah.
But I also think the planning commission should require residency.
That would be up to the council, I believe.
So it's my understanding that in statute, the planning commission can't require residency. That's what I was told when I was a member of the planning commission. And I'm seeing nods, yeah.
And why are you not allowed to require, if you require residency in, for every other committee, can you require residency for that committee?
I don't
No.
think so.
No.
Is
it's in
it
state statute.
charter or ordinance or?
I believe it's
Statute.
state statute.
Oh, so anyone can apply for a planning commission? Okay.
You don't have to appoint them, but in fact, yes,
It
they
can't be
can,
required.
under state statute, you could just not appoint them.
Okay, so I will those were my two sticking points, because I think if you're making decisions about our city, then you should be living in our city. That's my opinion, but I will
Yeah.
not argue with the wisdom of the legislature in creating that statute. The next thing, though, the issue that I have is assuming that the incumbents are qualified. And to our chair's point from the JEDI committee, sometimes incumbents aren't qualified. So I don't think we should just make an assumption that just because they're a long-serving member, that they're a good working member of the committee. So I don't think we should just usher in incumbents just because they've always been on the council.
On the committee?
Or, sorry, on the committee. So that's one thing I have. And then because under membership term, you're no longer having staggered membership, which means it's all or nothing. They're like, everyone comes and goes at the same time.
Well, Counselor, that is one of those where policy encourages, not required. So right now, they are all staggered. So last, I believe in May, we had several committees where they were not staggered, and we gave 3-year terms to several appointees on a couple committees to make sure that they are staggered. So they are staggered now. This language that's struck is one of those, sort of advisory policy encourages clauses, not a requirement that they be staggered. But practically, they are at this point.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they will continue to be
They would continue to be
staggered.
staggered, unless the council changes. I mean, we are right now at a place where every committee has staggered terms, yes.
Okay. Well, and then the only other things that I think that we should consider are some of the changes that were brought to our attention earlier when Mrs. Mulvaney was talking about the recommendations about how to remove a committee member, or how to appoint a committee member with the expectation that they understand what the committee's role is and what their work load will look like. I don't know if those should be included necessarily in this policy, but I think that we need to recognize that we have a committee chair here and is asking for certain things, and to not listen would be irresponsible.
Well, I've been accused of being irresponsible before. So I think what I said to the chair is that I agreed with many of her suggestions. I've got to think about and look for other examples of how we implement them, how do other communities do it.
So maybe we should just table this until we have an opportunity to do some more research after hearing the.
Well, or approve it and then amend it later. I mean, I think it's going to be a broader discussion. For example, your comment about, I think the word you used was ushering in a reappointment. As I read the manager's suggestion, which would be the chair, would be if the chair writes a letter of approval, then we would not have to have them come in for a reappointment interview. Well, a chair has no more authority than a mayor does. And one vote here doesn't mean anything. So I would say that if you are being reappointed to a committee, I mean, sometimes it's work to be on these committees, as you well know. And sometimes you may have a member of a committee who is up for reappointment. And I believe the responsibility needs to rest with the committee member. If they don't think that person is a productive committee member, they can certainly email council members. Now, under Freedom of Information Act, that email would be public record if someone asks, why didn't you reappoint them, and did you receive any emails? But it's not always comfortable. So when I think about how much work we ask some of the chairs of the committees to do, I was a little loath to put one more step on them, saying, okay, you've got to, and maybe the chair sincerely believes that well, this member, I want this member to come in for an interview because I don't think they're a productive member, but this one is really productive, and So I'm going to write the letter for them and not write the letter for I just didn't want to put one person in that position. And I thought, maybe we assume that, we keep referring back to you, Joel, and it's just because you're here. So, I don't want to put that all, for example, on Joel. And if there's a member that the committee believes should not be reappointed, then that would be a uncomfortable vote to have to take at a committee, but that's why chairs make the big bucks. Yes.
Well, that's why I suggested removal process, because that's actually a more appropriate way to focus on that particular issue. But I do have something else to say, if it's okay.
Of course.
If you could come up with the mic, because people can't hear online.
It's the issue of city residents on committees. I actually disagree with councilwoman?
Councilor Spaulding.
Counselor, thank you. Counselor Spaulding, about our committee. The way I look at it is this, that everyone needs to be, obviously except the Planning Commission, everyone needs to be a city resident unless there's a need that is viewed by the committee that could be served by someone who's outside of the city. That's how I look at it. There are people on my committee who do not live in the city, but they're essential to our committee because of either the position that they hold or the kind of things that they bring to the table. So that's how I would view it. It's not maybe as cut and dried, if you will, but it's a different way of looking at it in terms of how can we possibly be helpful if a person on the committee is not pulling their weight in some way, or it's just, especially between the city and the town, there's such a history of our relationship with them that is not all positive, what if someone's taking out some kind of personal vendetta because they don't like the town people or whatever. So I'm trying to think of a cleaner way to do this, and that is simply to look at what's the usefulness for the committee. What do we need in terms of skills? If we can't find a volunteer who can meet those skills within the city, then we look outside of the city for someone who can help. That's how I view it.
Isn't that what you said?
Yeah, I think that the idea is that if there are two people who are otherwise qualified, be that what it may be, right? Like that's a term. Otherwise qualified is a term we have to use because this policy has to be good for your committee and cow pasture and all of them, right? So we can't say what the specific qualification is, but if there's two people who are otherwise qualified, one of them happens to be a city resident, the preference would be given to the city resident.
Oh, I see.
That's the idea, to try to strike that balance, right? So, and it's, I don't think it's all that different, honestly, from what the policy was before. If you look at, 4D, you'll see that, residency was listed as a factor in the appointment. What this tries to do is sort of put some meat around what residency means, right? And so it's, if you have two people with similar qualifications and the only difference is where they live, you would want to give preference to the person who's the resident.
Got it. Okay, good. Thank you.
Did you have a question, comment? You did? Yeah, okay.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the proposed amendments to the municipal body and appointments policy.
Is there a second? That motion dies for lack of a second.
I just want to,
If I was allowed to second it, Councilor Deering, I would, but as I'm presiding over the meeting, I'm not allowed to do that. Personally, I think we should approve these. I think they're well done. As I said earlier, I'm going to take the chair's committee suggestions seriously. I think there should be some sort of removal process, and I think we could always tighten things up, but I look at the work that the manager's done, and I don't see any reason to delay. I'm not saying we won't add to it at a later date, but I don't see any reason to delay it either. And with that, unless,
I just wanted to double down on that, on that remarks, which is that and I guess Councilor Spalding had earlier expressed a hope to sort of table this until we could do it more completely. That part of my lack of second was just wanting to be clear about, like, I would like to approve this, but with the understanding, so I would like the motion to be approval of this with the understanding that we would consider updates as suggested by Chair Mulvaney around sort of further finessing of the way people serve on committees. I just wanted to make sure that there wasn't a fully realized intention to revisit it at a future date.
Yeah, and I guess my preference was really based in that as I said earlier, I've really got to think about how to incorporate your suggestions. I fully intend to, but I've got to think about the most effective way to do it. And with other things on our agenda, yeah, and with other things on the agenda, I could see that, I could see it taking a few months, because I would like to ask folks in the public, well, how would you do it? Here are some choices, there's a lot of different ways you could do it, but how would you do it? So as I said, my preference, given the work done by the manager, would simply be to approve these now, understanding fully that it might be, I don't think it would be 30 days, I really don't. It might be 60, it might be 90, it might be 120, because we're considering an amendment to, an amendment to our policy that would allow for removal, and that's not something one should take lightly. So unless anyone would like to reconsider their vote.
Well, I just think.
Yes.
Well, I have a question. If we, based on the fact that it sounds like have the next batch of committee members coming before us next.
The 22nd.
Of October?
Yep.
So we'll still be operating under the policy as it stands right now.
Yes.
Yes.
So I think that the changes to the policy are helpful. I just am concerned that when we pass things, it feels like we're done and we move it aside and then it doesn't come back. And so I'm very concerned. I'm very concerned that it's not going to get done. So I'd be willing to approve this if we can set a deadline for when we're going to we're going to have another conversation and amend it.
But it's not double talk. You're talking about adding, I believe for the first time in the city's history, an amendment to these policies that allow for removal. And in light of some of the things that have gone on, I'm not saying I'm unsupportive of that. I think everyone should be able to be impeached, including Supreme Court justices, personally, if the circumstances are right. But that's just me. No, I mean, I think no one is above removal if circumstances dictate. But I really want to, but in light of what we have gone through, as Ms. Mulvaney said in her remarks, well, in light of what we have gone through in the last few years, I'm going to consider that pretty carefully. So, and so like I said, Councilor Spalding, it's not double talk. It's just, I want to be thoughtful about how we do it. I want to fully consider the options. If you said, I mean, if you said, well, Mayor, I'm going to push you for a date, I'd say, well, then give me 120 days because we've got other stuff, we've got other stuff coming up too. So I'm fully committed, I've said it 3 times, to incorporating these ideas. I really have to consider it, what that mechanism will look like.
Let me improve your comfort level a little bit. We actually do have something in the current policy that removes a person, but the only criteria is that they miss 3 meetings in a row. So there actually is that in there. We would just be adding to it.
Yeah, and I don't even like that one, to be honest with you. No, the 3 meetings in a row, I don't like because there's life happens. And sometimes circumstances.
It's already there, so.
Yeah, and I don't even like that. It would have to be 3 unexcused absences if, sometimes bad things happen in life and sometimes things that are unavoidable happen. So, and that is so absolute. If you miss 3 meetings in a row, and I hate to be, your mom dies, your dad dies, and your sister dies, and it happens to be on committee meeting days. Guess what?
I'm just saying. it's already-
Yeah. So I would like to, council, it's up to you. If you'd like to revisit this, we can, if you'd like to reconsider the lack of a second, I would accept that. Yes.
Would, so I guess procedurally, would I remove to approve this policy with the understanding that council and staff would revisit the policy with an eye to updates around the proposed thing within 120 days? Would that be
I'll
an-
accept that as a motion. Is
New
there a
motion.
second?
I'll second that.
It's moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Yay. Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion as presented, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed? Thank you very much, council, I appreciate it. Council, we are at item 8E on the agenda. This is the discussion of the suspension of the winter parking ban.
Presentation. Okay, there's that. Let's see, why is that not coming up?
You're frozen. Do you need that one?
Should be this one. Let's try again. Let's try again, see if that works.
You don't need this guy, do you?
No, that's for the TV.
Oh.
There you
There
go.
you go. All right.
Just tired.
All right, so, so I wanted to touch base with the council, give you an update on our thinking for the suspension of the winter parking ban, and just starting off with, what is it, why do we have it? The purpose of the parking ban is to allow for efficient, timely plowing, clearing of snow, and that's by making removing cars as obstacles as our plow drivers are getting the city streets cleared. So from November 15th through April 1st, there is no parking on any city streets or municipal parking lots from 1 a.m. to 6 a.m. We sell overnight parking permits for designated spaces at 53 spaces around the city. And any violators for that, of that policy are towed. So as anyone stays parking on Main Street after 1 a.m. Between the dates of November 15th and April 1st will be towed as for having violated the parking ban. So I think we can do better than a hard ban. We have been thinking about this Carol was still the clerk when we started thinking about this. We thought about this last year. We didn't feel comfortable with the communication of a ban. I think we're getting we're at the point now where we do feel comfortable proceeding. And what's the problems with the ban we have right now is that it's simply too rigid. And there's no parking rules in effect for periods of no snow in the forecast when it just doesn't make sense to enforce something like that. It has inequitable impact on renters. So some units may not have adequate parking for all the occupants. I actually hear from both renters and landlords on this issue. I think they're in alignment on this not being a popular policy. And the other thing is we know other places have found ways to do it in a more nuanced approach. So there's, in Albany, for where I spend a lot of time, they have alternate site parking. We actually explored that here. We didn't think it would work. And so, there are better ways to clear snow in places like Barre that get a lot of snow without having a hard parking ban. So we've thought long and hard about this, and we have, some, really 3 planks to our plan. One is to transition to a forecast based parking ban. So we would issue a parking ban with the same rules, which is no parking on city streets or municipal parking lots from 1 a.m. to 6 a.m. We would issue it only when we know there or expected weather patterns that would require plowing. We would communicate this ban. This was the plank of the plan that we have really struggled with, is communicating it to our residents. And so we have multiple ways of doing that, which I'll get to in just a second, about the effectiveness of when the ban goes into effect and when it is lifted. And then we've also identified auxiliary parking at the BOR. So permits would continue to be available as well for people who want to do that and have the certainty of having a parking spot. And those would continue to be an option. But for people who don't want to buy a parking permit, who want to, sort of only respond when there is snow events, we would make free parking available at the BOR for people to get their cars out of the way so our plow drivers could clear the streets. So just talking a little bit more in detail about each of those planks. So transitioning to the forecast-dependent ban, would require close monitoring of forecasts by city staff. We monitor it now, obviously, because we need to make sure we have staff ready for the callouts, but this would require much more in-depth watching of the weather. And we're going to be pretty conservative on this. Any forecast that may result in a plowing operation, at least in the early going, is going to trigger a parking ban. And so we may have situations where we don't get much of a storm and it does not require plowing, but we've called a parking ban. And I think that we're going to err on the side of caution, certainly in the early going. And we would, when we do decide to trigger the parking ban, we're going to get our message out quickly and effectively, something along the lines of what's on the PowerPoint here, which is Barre City snow parking ban in effect, no parking on city streets and municipal parking lots from 1 a.m. to 6 a.m. effective December 2nd until the ban is lifted. We would lift the ban similarly after the plowing and cleanup is complete. And, this want to caution people that the bans may not last just during the duration of the storm event. We have cleanup afterwards. We have to remove snow. So there may be situations when there isn't snow in the forecast. We've had a big storm, but the next 2 days are clear. We still have a ban because we need to do clearing. So we would, obviously lift it as soon as we can, but it doesn't necessarily mean it would be one-day bans. And then during times of the benefit of this, obviously, is that during times of fair weather, I guess I don't know if fair weather is an accurate description of Vermont winters, but during times of no snow, people would be able to park on city streets and parking lots in accordance with current uses, right? So you'd still have to have permits for certain lots, and you still have to pay your meters, but the parking spaces would be open. The communication. So we have identified 4 ways of getting the word out to residents. So in this budget, the council approved and our plan to buy the Regroup mobile app for notifications to Barre City residents. We are currently testing that. We started testing that with department heads. We're still working out a few glitches. We want to make sure it's absolutely ready to go before we go live with it so that we minimize any frustration with it. So that is very, very soon on the horizon for getting residents signed up. We will be using VT Alerts as well, and our Facebook page and website. So we have 4 ways that people will be able to find out that a parking ban is in effect, as in getting it on their phone. These are all things that you can get on your phone for the notification. We also will be deploying our digital signs throughout the winter to alert motorists. So we've purchased these in the last few years. We have 3 signs that can be deployed. We're figuring out what the exact locations would be, but we've unfortunately had to deploy them for floods, and they've been in spots where people do see them, and we would keep them up all winter to get messages about whether ban is in effect and directing people to the website or some other place where we can get details about the ban.
How is this powered? Are they reliable?
Yeah, they're reliable. They are. They're, don't know exactly how they're powered, but they've been out for, they can be out for extended periods.
In the winter?
Yeah. And then we would also use the Civic Center sign on Seminary Street, which is visible to people driving up and down Main Street, and that would be used to alert people of the auxiliary parking at the BOR. So there are actually strict rules about what can or can't be displayed on that sign, but because we're using the BOR, we can use that sign to talk about the parking ban. So the idea here is to have multiple ways, 4 ways to get this on your phone. And, and if you're driving around, several ways to hopefully catch you as well, to make sure that you know that the parking ban is in effect. We also hope, we know this is new, but we hope as we get more used to this, both city staff and residents, that people will see a big storm in the forecast and it'll just become sort of automatic, hopefully after the first couple of times that we go through this. And then the third plank of the plan is auxiliary parking, to make sure that people who choose to not buy the permits have a place to go when there is a ban in effect. So as I mentioned, we have 53 overnight parking spaces for overnight parking. Those will remain available just as they are today. And those are located at parking lots throughout the city. Right now, the current cost is $108 for 6 months. It's $216 for the year. And based on the city's adopted fee schedule, it goes up 2.5% in January. So in addition to those spaces, as I said, we would make the dirt lot at the Civic Center adjacent to the BOR available for anyone who does not have off-street parking and who chooses not to purchase a permit.
So, question about that. So, what if there was a snowstorm? I mean, obviously, we plow all day long, 24 hours a day. Depends on what the weather is doing. Sometimes it's early in the morning at 1 o'clock, which is preferred because that's when there are fewer vehicles on the road and it's safest. But it's very often at 7 or 8 o'clock, depending on the weather event. So my only concern with allowing free parking during all events when the ban, what if the basketball tournament is being held while there happens to be a ban?
Yeah, I mean,
or another event where we've told someone renting the BOR, you will have this parking lot available.
Yeah, I think that's, it's certainly possible that could happen. What we've talked about as an option in that case is, right now we have this seminary may become a sort of a satellite location for that, which remains available for now. And so that would become, our plan would be that would become sort of a satellite location for the time being in the case of a conflict like that. So it's hopefully, we would hope not to run into too many of those, but that's our thinking right now, is to identify that location, which is nearby. It's further down those arrows there on the map. So for people who have to use the odd, it would become a familiar spot as well. Yeah.
Is it possible to use the backside of the odd instead of that dirt parking for events that are going on?
Yeah, I think we could use either. I think the front one, we think that the front one is going to be easier to plow with our, easier to plow and with our smaller trucks that we have, that facilities can use. So that's why we leaned on that one first. I think that it's possible that we could shift it to the back. I think for the big events that the mayor is referring to, the likelihood is that both lots get quite heavy use. So the reality is we'd probably be bleeding into, we'd be bleeding into seminary no matter what lot we used up there. Yeah.
Thanks, sir.
Sure. So the rollout plan is, we're gonna do some flyers and city mailings. I'd love to do postcards. That's part of our plan as well, just to get things in the mail to people at their home. And so that's in the works, pending, assuming we have a good plan and that, unless we have to make changes to it. We would do, an aggressive social media campaign to have residents both become aware of this change and to register for regroup once that's ready to launch. We're thinking of, having video tutorials of, showing the screen and what to do and step by step. As I said, we are in the last stages of testing regroup to make sure, we really want to make sure it's seamless. The last thing we want is to have glitches or people struggling to sign on. So we're doing over testing to make sure that it's, we can very clearly describe to people what they have to do to get signed up for it. We will, for the regroup app, most of these messages will be delivered in-app or via email. And that's because there's no additional cost to the city for delivering messages that way. We incur additional costs for calls or text messages. So for most people who are familiar with their cell phones, they won't notice the difference. It's the same way as getting a notification from any other app. We will have, options for people who maybe elderly residents, maybe people with, maybe a sight disability or anything like that who need a phone call or need another option. We will handle those manually. We want to limit our calls and text messages because we are capped of how many we can send per year, and above that, we have additional cost. So
Sight disability?
if somebody can't see or, their
Why would
messages.
they be driving?
Well, it's true. They might have a caretaker in the car.
Just asking.
Family member or something, but, so if there's, things like that, we will have options for, the other thing is that regroup will eventually be used for more than just the parking ban as well.
Gotcha.
But yeah, so that we will have options for people who can't use the in-app, but those we're gonna try to limit to, sort of a demonstrated need, for it. For, like I said, for most people who use a cell phone on a regular basis, our hope is that this will be a pretty common experience with, similar to the other apps that they have on their phones. As our police department does warnings and flyers in the weeks leading up to the parking ban, so they will be doing similar things this year as well. So we'll try to get the word out that way. And we're open to other ideas, of how to get this word out. If there's anything we can do to inform voters, we'll do that. I know we are going back to the full page ads in the Times Argus on the third week of the month, and so this will obviously be a big topic for the next couple of times we do that. And here you can see a screenshot of what the regroup app looks like. You can actually see the test to resident channel is part of our testing regimen. And so it's a very clean app. It's pretty, it's pretty simple. And so we're just hoping that we want to make the rollout process very seamless for people as they get used to it. So, and then just to be very explicit and clear, this is a pilot program. And so we all have to make this work. And that means, on the city side, we're going to be taking on additional responsibilities, which is to very closely watch the weather, make sure we're communicating effectively and in a timely manner. So these will be new things that we have to do, and we have to do them well. And the residents, it's really one piece, but it's important, and that's to stay informed. And so, if residents don't stay informed, that could hurt the longevity of this pilot. So if it does not work, if we fail on the city staff side, or if residents aren't finding a ways to get this news, we don't think we'll have much of an option but to go back to the old, the really hard winter parking ban. So we will, it'll take all of us together to make this successful. And that's it for me. And happy to take questions. I'm happy to take suggestions. There's things I'm sure we haven't thought of, and we're happy to hear those from you and residents to make sure that we make this rollout as smooth as we can.
Councilor Stockwell?
This seems really well thought out. It seems like a great experiment to try. You have a lot of contingencies, a lot of alternate routes. This seems really wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Spaulding.
I would agree with that. My one question is, what happens if someone is parking when there is a ban? Do they get a ticket? Do they get towed? What happens?
They get towed
Immediately?
immediately.
Okay.
Yeah.
So no warning, no, okay.
We do warnings leading up to the event, and so up to the hard ban, right? So if there's, our police department will actually do warnings, even if there's no snow event for people parked on Main Street. And funny thing, I got an angry call to my office one day because somebody got a warning, and they were complaining that the city does nothing to tell them about the ban. I'm like, the warning ticket you got was kind of our way of letting you know that it's coming. So they'll put, it looks like the tickets with the envelopes, they'll put a warning on the car, they start about a week or so before the deadline of the parking ban goes into effect.
The one other suggestion I had was, I know in the past it's been very popular for people to go on the radio and sing songs about things, so. sorry, Amanda.
I was going to suggest a TikTok dance, actually.
Yes,
But,
yes.
I mean, we could go old school songs.
So I was thinking maybe another medium that
Yes.
people who maybe don't read the paper are not on social media.
That's
but
a
they
great
might listen
suggestion.
To the radio.
That's a
so.
great suggestion.
Mr.
I don't
Bruton?
listen much to the radio, like WDEV. Where do you suggest, what
I
are
listen to
the?
the point, but I
Point?
think there are a lot of people who listen to local, like Froggy and what's the other one? The classic rock station, Frank FM.
Okay, I will try. Thank you, that's a great suggestion.
Have an AI app that will make a beautiful song for you.
Really?
Probably cheaper.
Well, thank you. We'll accept that. Counselor Wazazak?
Thank you. Thank you, Nicholas, for this. Very thrilled that we're finally taking this step. Couple suggestions. One, we have some large, both individual landlords, but also property management companies in town. So, doing targeted conversations with Stone and Browning and Down Street and some of our frequent flyer landlords that often come into council to talk about things, folks we know that are active with their tenants, just making sure that they're putting out their own materials in their rental packets, et cetera. Just trying to, the city can only reach so many people, and the more folks that we can get spreading the message, the more likely that we'll have success with this. I think radio is a good idea. Perhaps some paid social media, like the boosted posts that you don't have to be following the city, but as you're scrolling through your feed, the ads pop up. We're seeing a lot of political ones this time of year. Something like that would be good. And for long-term capital planning, I understand this isn't something that's going to be online by November 15th. But the city of Winooski, I used to live in Salem, Massachusetts. They use the municipal lighting systems. They have those little blue lights that flash when there's a snow ban in effect. So assuming, like I would like to see, that this is not just a pilot program, but a permanent switch, perhaps some capital planning to, and I think you're hitting that a bit with the digital signs, with the signs for the BOR, but long-term investing in those, I can see it in my head. It's the blue flashing light right off of exit, I think 12. So yeah, some of those things. What other capital planning do we need to do in the long term to make this thing work permanently? So those are just some of the thoughts that I was having as we were discussing this. And thank you for finally taking this step.
No, absolutely. We're happy to. And I think that those are great suggestions. I believe Burlington does the lights as well. So our hope is that really that we get through this pilot season, it works well, as few glitches as possible. And then if we can sort of get to a more permanent, situation like this, that we will make those transitions to those more long-term infrastructure changes. But yes, thank you for those suggestions.
Amy Gelford?
Hi, I think when I first bought my house, I may have gotten like a sort of welcome to Barre letter, which had a lot of things in it, including, I think it had some information about the parking ban. So I think that was how I found out about it, but I really wonder how renters find out about it. I remember my first winter, I was like thinking about running an errand in the evening, and then I decided not to, and I didn't remember to move from parallel parking into my parking spot, and so I got a ticket. And it was like one of those nights where it was just cold and clear and there was absolutely no snow, and I was kind of mad, but I get it. Like, it's the parking ban, it's the rules. But my street recently has had a lot more houses converted into duplexes or duplexes that have reopened. So it's great. There's more people living there, but there's more cars. And at one point this past winter, I was out shoveling some snow that was blocking my driveway. And one of the renters on my neighborhood who had left so that their driveway could be plowed, but came back and was like, "Can I help you with that?" And I said, "Well, you could obey the parking ban," because what I was shoveling was the snow that hadn't been able to be plowed because of them parking there. And they said, "The what?" And I said, "The parking ban. There's a parking ban here in the winter." And they had no idea, because their landlord lives in a surrounding town that I'm sure is a rural town that doesn't have a parking ban. So the tenants had no idea. And they said, "Oh, our landlord just told us, if there wasn't room in the back lot, just to park on the street." So maybe that would be part of the outreach, even more than what Councilor Wozniak said. Like, I don't know if the city landlords are the problem, but some of the out-of-town landlords may not be aware there's a parking ban, you know, and the person pointed down the street, and there's about 11 houses on my street, and there were 4 cars that had been parked. And I don't think there was any winter parking enforcement on our street last winter. So like, if we can't enforce it, and I know during snowstorms, there's more important things than enforcing it to, like, you know, come up with a more flexible plan. One thing I wondered about is some places I've lived have had snow emergency routes, which probably a lot of times overlaps with streets where there's not parking allowed anyway. But that would maybe be one thing, just to help with emergency access and the city crews being able to plow, is you might have some streets that are designated like, okay, there is a parking ban on certain streets just because it's too important to be able to clear them, or like maybe they're really steep, or for some reason you just don't want people parking on those. I think they were called snow emergency routes. And then also maybe you might have, you know, depending on how this plays out, you might try like partial liftings of the ban as you clear certain neighborhoods or certain streets. Maybe there's a way that it's not all on or off throughout the city either. It's sort of like you figure out which parts of the city get cleared first, like maybe downtown gets cleared first, or maybe the main arteries get cleared first or something like that. But I think it's great because it's kind of either feels too strict or hard to enforce. So I think this is a good compromise.
Thank you. Yes.
Just 2 questions quickly. One, the current 53 overnight spaces, what's the uptake on that? Are they generally all used, half used?
Cheryl would know.
I would say that they are generally 85% full.
So we're not yet at the point where there should be more of them, I guess is my question. It sounds like there's enough flex.
Depending on the area, like the back parking lot, Granite Street, that one's full. It's Nelson. Basically, the apartments over Nelson Brothers. Plain Street, that's usually has quite a few vacancies. Summer and Elm, that one's full. But scattered wise, there's a few.
Thank you. And my second question is just a point of clarification. When the parking ban is in place, when we've gotten the notification, it will still only be from 1 a.m. to 6 a.m.,
Correct.
correct?
Yep.
It will not be 24/7.
Correct. Yep.
Just wanted to-
Exactly.
Thank you.
Yep.
It will always be 1 a.m. to 6 a.m.? That won't work. No. I mean, I'm really trying to be an optimist because I am by nature, but I've also been signing parking lots and been responsible for parking lots and assigning tenant parking for decades. I can picture the person who's parked on the street and then we get a snowstorm and they're towed and they say, well, I had flown out of state for the day and how did I know it was going to snow? I can picture, I mean, first and foremost, have we contacted towing companies who will engage with the city so that when we call them, they will absolutely come right out?
Yeah, the chief is working on those. I don't know if those are signed, but he's
Yeah,
making
I mean,
sure those are
that's a
secured.
big concern because, you know, what I picture happening, and it's not that I don't want people to be able to park on the street, but it's always a select few who ruin it for everyone. And I can picture the folks parking on the street. And then even when we tow them, the city doesn't receive that money. That money goes to the towing company. What the city does receive is a bill to have that driver, that plow driver, work overtime, because once the car is gone, or once the 2 or 3 cars are gone, they have to make another pass down that street, or there's going to be, you know, piles of snow where the car was. So that's really the concern that I have, is that if we don't make the matter worse by not being able to deploy towing operators, and the towing operators are saying, well, I don't want to come, it's snowing out. Well, no kidding. So, like I said, I'm being optimistic. I mean, you nailed it. We all have to make this work.
Right.
And I just hope we all make it work.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm assuming you already thought of this, but are you putting something in with water bills and every other communication that goes out to?
Yeah, we're gonna we wanted to make sure that, you know, there were no large concerns with the plan, but once we have sort of a general idea that it's okay, the idea is to get a flyer ready that we can put out with anything going out from the city. Yeah.
Yes.
I just want to follow up on that briefly. I've lived in places with parking bans on all varieties of the system. I've gotten whopping tickets for not moving my car for street cleaning every other week and so on and so forth. When a car is in violation of the parking ban right now, and there has to be a plowing operation on that street, they just swerve around? Is it towed immediately then?
What generally happens is the plow driver will call it in to dispatch, which will call in the towing company to get it removed, and then they'll try to swing back around. That's generally what they'll try to do. So there's, you know, whether the tow company comes or not is, you know, that we're beholden to them responding to their contract, but that's the general plan. The general idea is plow driver calls it into dispatch, dispatch gets it moved out.
So we sort of already have a system in place around when there are cars in this. I'm saying it's not exactly, it's not exactly analogous to what a new version of this would be, but we have dealt with things like this.
It comes up, yeah, and then we'll have, police will try to make rounds to see if there's a, you know, if we know there's a storm event coming, they'll try to proactively go and check the spots, to get those cars moved, if they can. So there's an infrastructure to do it. Does it happen perfectly every time? No. Yep.
What happened to Councilor Wozniak? Oh, I thought you had your hand up,
He's the green
Councilor,
square.
sorry.
I did, I put it back.
Okay.
I'll just, nothing important, we can move on.
Okay, and I think you're right. I think that's a point well taken, that because for decades people are used to a parking ban, they're used to the parking ban. So I think the infractions are infrequent. But once we start allowing people to park on the street, I think we'll see them. Look, I'm going to be an optimist about it, but I just, what I struggle with when I watch city staff struggle with shortages is someone having to go back, which is why I kind of pushed, you know, on the policy this evening. I struggle when people have to go back and do something twice. And so, you know, for that reason, I want to respect the folks who are trying to keep our streets safe and clean. And I don't want them to have to be away from their families another 3 hours. And I don't want the city to have to pay another 3 hours of overtime because people can't move their cars or make ridiculous excuses. You know, I parked my car in the street, I knew it was going to snow, and I went on a date. Well, no date for you.
Going till 1 a.m.
Okay, I do like it, though. I like the thought that we can make parking more convenient for our residents because, yes, we all aspire to create parking problems. Council, we are at 8F on the agenda. You're 8E, the amended 8F, discuss use of elevation funding.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. So there's a memo in the packet for this. We received notification from the state that we have been awarded $900,000 of out of a $3.5 million pot of money in last year's budget to pay last year's state budget to pay for elevation of residential structures. So we are, you know, excited about the allocation. And I laid out some information in the memo about what it means. So we're limited to, you know, each elevation is capped at $300,000. So we would do a minimum of 3. That means if we, you know, if there are ways to do elevations for less than 300, which is, you know, questionable, there may be a chance to do perhaps at least one more. We have received 13 intakes from residential property owners interested in being considered for this pot of money. And so, and that includes Good Samaritan Haven, which is undergoing a restoration project, which they've learned now to meet flood hazard regulations requires an elevation. VEM, by the way, has told us that Good Sam, even though they're you know, not a residential structure in the traditional sense, would qualify for this funding. So they are part of that 13 intakes. What we're seeking from you tonight is, you know, direction on a set of objective standards that we can use, Janet and I would use to apply to these 13 intakes. And, you know, we would use to evaluate, you know, sort of create a priority of which properties may be, you know, best suited for this. There's 13 intakes, so there's going to be at least 10 that are left on the table. And so we wanted to the extent possible, set some objective criteria for how we would measure the, the validity or the priority of a particular structure. There's a couple, I've listed here several possibilities for you. We're interested to hear from you if you think they are appropriate, not appropriate, if you have others. There are two, the first two on the list in the memo are from VEM as part of the grant award. One is that preference should be given to properties that received a substantial damage determination as a result of the July 2023 flood. And preference should be given, and it cannot go to properties pursuing a FEMA buyout. I believe that that may impact one property, I believe, on this intake. There's the other standards that we've set here are suggestions from myself and Janet. They're not legal, they're not required, they're just things that we think might give us, like I said, that objective standard by which we look at these properties. One is the number of units saved, or the capacity of the building. The next is a demonstrated financial damage caused during the July 2023 flood. The idea here being that if a property sustained more damage, it's more susceptible to flooding perhaps, and it may be, a better use of money to save it than maybe a property that sustained lesser dollars of damage. A demonstrated financial need of the owner, based on a number of factors. The thinking there being that there may be some properties who have property owners who have other resources to do something like this that a lesser well-off person or property owner may have. And then probable flood hazard, not sure exactly how to word it. The idea here is is this a property that is more likely than another property to suffer catastrophic flood damage? Are they in the floodway? Have they how many times have they flooded? That kind of thing. That's a standard that Janet and I would look to apply to something like that. Like I said, we want to hear your feedback. Are these right? Are these wrong? Are there some that we've forgotten? And then the idea would be, Janet and I would create sort of standards to assign a priority score to these things and bring that back to you so that we can apply those objective standards to the 13 intakes that we've received so far. And then we can start, moving with those property owners to get some of this money out the door.
Councilor Wassenczak?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Nicholas. So just a couple of initial thoughts are, I understand that this money specifically was allocated in view of the 2023 flooding, but if there are applicants who were also significantly flooded in 2024, that seems to me like something that we should take into consideration if, not to diminish anyone suffering from 2023, but if they were hit in 2023 but spared in 2024, as opposed to getting walloped twice in 23 and 24, that might show us that a elevation might be the only way out if they're not pursuing a buyout. And then on the question I have is on the language of pursuing a FEMA buyout. So that is just the 20 or so that we've forwarded to VEM. That does not include the other 40 or so that have not been forwarded. Is that correct?
Yeah, those would not be captured under that definition. So,
Okay.
the other thing, that is part of that is that, a property owner could always withdraw their FEMA application, right? So that's just, not to throw a giant wrench into it, but I know at least one property is pursuing a FEMA buyout that's in a potential floodplain restoration area for which we've forwarded an application to VEM. That property also obviously expressed interest in this, that they could always withdraw their FEMA buyout request if they so chose, right? So that's just something to keep in mind, that even a submitted application can be walked away from at any part of the process, including up to and including closing. So it doesn't have to be a hard line for someone who is on that route, but they would have to give up their FEMA buyout at this point to pursue this pot of money.
That makes sense. And just on the point about Good Samaritan Haven, I do not want to at all diminish the impact on homeless neighbors that the flooding events have. But what would give me pause about using elevation funding on the Good Sam would be that that's not a space that's accessible 24/7. They have certain hours when folks are allowed to be there, and then they have to find somewhere else to go. So I think that my preference would be to prioritize uh, structures, homes, residences, however we want to say it, um, which, if elevated, would provide someone with shelter 24/7, 365.
And if I just may, on your point, Counselor, about the 2024 flooding, I don't believe that would be a challenge. I think that's a good way to sort of also add into that probable flood hazard risk bullet. You know, I don't think there's any limitation from what the state said about, you know, adding, you know, if they were flooded in 2023, they're eligible. If they were also flooded in 24, that, I don't think there's anything that would preclude us from making that a more explicit preference for this funding.
Yes, yeah, no, I agree, and I think I think that's a step that the city should take.
Great. Councilor Guston?
I have lots of thoughts. One of them echoes what Councilor Wasilczak was just saying. We told so many people were told, apply for the FEMA buyout. You know, you can back out at any point. So I would want to make absolutely sure that pursuing a FEMA buyout means in the final stages of has been forwarded to VEM, not just I filled out the application online because they said as many people as possible should. So that's one. I would be interested in, and this is a little bit of a corollary to probable flood hazard risk, I would also be interested in as much as we're able to incorporate this, what sort of hydrology and river science says about elevation in that spot. Does it still make sense to elevate a house in that spot according to the way we know the water is going to be moving, not just according to the map? Because those maps are outdated and not going to be updated for a while. I'm not entirely sure what criteria those would be, but I would be interested in looking at a sort of a scientific basis to some extent. I would also be interested in, for the application, what height it would have to be elevated to. Because I would imagine a lot of the costs to elevate something 1 foot versus 10 feet, there's probably a lot of base costs baked in to the simple act of elevating and not necessarily relative to the height of elevation. So I'd be curious what height is required to elevate. And I understand that that requires an elevation certificate and it's relative to flood hazard area and so on. And my last comment is there was a demonstrated financial damage to the property caused by the July 2023 flood. I struggle a little bit with categorizing damage in terms of dollar amounts. I understand that it's a convenient number, but it may not always capture, especially for a smaller house, it may not always capture the extent of the damage to a property. You know, a large house with high-end furnishings and an owner that is able to demonstrate financial damage may have only had 1 foot in the first floor, and a smaller house with maybe not the similar level of furnishings and an owner who wasn't able to prove a certain level of financial damage might have had the wire would have been quite a lot higher, and that might make it a better candidate for an elevation. So that's a very long way of saying, I would be interested in finding other ways to measure damage that are not simply financial cost to the building. The height of the water inside the home. A lot of people can tell you I had 3 feet in the first floor, and so on and so forth. Like what information are we getting back on that? Because financial damage could be pretty severe for someone who only had basement flooding.
Yep.
Yes.
Building somewhere on Councilor Guston's comments, I would want to know that we're not going to repair a house that's in a high probability for flooding again. You know, something that's in the flood zone, in the floodway, and it's got a, you know, it's not a good choice for the city or for the residents. So I don't know how you do that. Like some places are maybe in the floodway, but maybe they're going to be okay. So we need the expertise to make that decision. I would also want to note that the quality of the housing is otherwise okay. Not so much the size. I mean, small, large, who cares? But if the house is elevated, is the house otherwise in good shape? In other words, we shouldn't elevate a house that has so much structural damage, it's not a good use of funds. Even though the homeowners may really want it, it isn't a good use of the funds that we have if the rest of the house is in poor quality. Otherwise, I thought it was a good list. I don't know how you would determine financial need. I wouldn't want to go by AMI. I would want to give, it's so expensive to fix a house. I would want to do a fairly broad group of people, fairly widespread of incomes.
These are, this one isn't going to be easy.
No.
At all. No, it's not. I mean, I've been thinking, as you've all been speaking, you've made some great points. I think at the end of the day, the goal is to preserve, and maybe I might be saying this wrong, because I was going to say housing units, but I'm not, to preserve as many bedrooms as possible. You could say housing units. All houses are not created equal. Some of these homes may be able to be lifted for $200,000, and a home that looks very similar might cost $300,000. So the difficulty, I'm even thinking about, if you think about a community, any community, some people, 200 families are on the upper end of the income scale, and some folks are well below the poverty level. And the program should sort of fit the profile of the community. So I'm even thinking, well, if we had a way to say to a property owner, you don't have the means to borrow or leverage or get $200,000, but you have the ability to get 75. So we're going to require a match. We'll do 125. You're going to have to put up 75. Now, obviously, that is not going to work for everyone in our community. So I'm not saying we do it that way for everyone. We could make a number of grants available and say, we'll do some sort of match, and we could make some available to say, no, there is no required match because of your circumstances. This one isn't going to be easy. And honestly, Nicholas, I think you're going to have to put them all under a microscope and turn them and look at them, and it may be like a Rubik's Cube, where it's a certain combination works best for the city. But like I said, as I thought it through, and I said, well, there are a lot of people who are very poor who can't afford it. But what if they happen to have a home that, when we look at the other 12, say, I'm sorry, I know this is your home, but we have better opportunities over here in terms of preserving bedrooms and housing units. So I think you're going to find it really difficult to come up with. And the one thing that really concerns me is how judicious are people being about the grant funds, and about, I've negotiated with contractors most of my adult life, and sometimes negotiating a little bit, you're able to shave 10 or 15% off of a project cost. So, we've got to look at that as well. Are we spending this money just as well as we can? Because I think we all have the same goal. We want to preserve the most housing possible. Yes.
Just to speak to that, is there some kind of contractor of preference policy? Is it a grant fund? Just mechanically, is this a grant fund to the resident to, like, they've brought a quote from a contractor saying it will be this much? Do we have estimates that we have created as a city? Is there some way to balance that? Because, there's a huge difference between $200,000 and $300,000 to elevate a building. What's the assurance on that?
I believe, I only have the award notification, and I don't see anything specific to that. My suspicion is that this is going to be a joint project with the city and the homeowner, right? So there's likely going to be, city involvement in the entire process with and I imagine we'll hold the contracts for the elevations. We've actually talked to Montpelier about doing a joint contract for this to ensure better pricing, and to put a more compelling package together for a contractor to do something like this. So I don't see anything specific in the document I've received thus far, but I imagine this working similar to how an emergency watershed protection program works, where there's a really close partnership between the property owner and the municipality, just by virtue of how the program is structured. So.
And lastly, we'll have to think about what happens in the likely event of a tie.
Yeah.
There could be 5 that literally score almost identically.
Yes.
It's, like I said, this is not going to be an easy one by any stretch, and we've thrown a lot of tough tasks at you and Janet, and this one, in my opinion, this one is going to be right up there. Amy Galford.
Thank you. I was realizing I was just listening to different people. I think there were a couple different interpretations happening about hazard risk. Some of you were talking about kind of the way it's written, is the property more likely than others to suffer catastrophic damage? And that's, above the basic thresholds of the substantial damage and having financial damage. But some of you were speaking about it in terms of which are the homes that are more at risk from flooding. And some of you were not wanting to pick the highest risk homes because then that might be a bad investment. And I don't have the answer to that, but I just noticed it. Like both ways of looking at it make sense, right? The houses that are in danger need to be elevated, but also if you're prioritizing those, some of those might not be the ones you would pick. So that's just an observation that some of you were leaning on different sides of the risk discussion there. So maybe it's something more about like, and I have no idea how you would measure this, but sort of like, what's the probability of it being successful if you elevate it? Like maybe that's more the thing you're trying to get at is, will you go from high risk to low risk basically by doing the elevation is kind of more where you want to, will it actually move you from one risk category to the other? One thing I remember that came up with the buyout discussion was not just looking at the individual property alone, but looking at the neighboring properties. And sometimes I thought that was unfortunate for some people, like if none of their neighbors were pursuing buyouts, they kind of didn't rise as well in terms of thinking about floodplain restoration and that sort of thing. But I wonder if that should be a tool the city staff have to make this determination, is to look at the context of the properties. Like where is the property located relative to the river, relative to other buyouts and that sort of thing. Like, are you making this a tall island property surrounded by buyout properties, or like what's happening spatially? I mean, I think common sense, like the city staff will look at that, but maybe that's one of the features to look at in there is kind of the physical location context.
Thank you. Yes.
Along those same lines, I guess the thing that keeps coming back for me is, we're talking about doing all these other flood mitigation things. And so if we do those things and, I'm going to just throw something out. If we do, let's say we remove the Berlin Street Bridge and 3rd Street doesn't flood anymore, and we've spent all our money on 3rd Street to elevate it. I think to Amy's point, like how do we make sure that, and to Councilor Guston's point, how do we make sure that the things that we're going to do that we're already planning to do are going to make sense, and then we're not going to necessarily elevate someone in that area, and then they actually won't be flooded at all ever again when we do these other flood mitigation things. So if they are right next to the river, and we, maybe they're more of the proximity to where the flooding occurs would maybe be something to consider. I'm not sure, but I just keep thinking about how we are trying to do all these other things, but we're not going to know obviously until we do them.
Exactly. That's the
Or
challenge.
we don't do them for 5 years.
Well,
and
right,
they flood
and-
again.
Right.
Well,
I mean,
all of those
yeah,
things.
it's tough. You're nailing all the right points.
Because then if you end up saying, okay, well, I'm going to pick this house, and then you do these other things, and you're like,
Right.
why did they do the house?
I mean, I think, I was very, very intentional about not putting the list of 13 here, because I think it was important not to sort of bias you in any way, right? In setting these standards. So, what I would say is that once you do see who are the 13 properties, I think we would all look at that list collectively and say, they all make sense for elevation. So I think that I don't know if fortunate's the right word, but we're in a position where we're unlikely to make, it'll be hard to make a bad decision with this elevation money. We're likely gonna more be on the side of, boy, it'd be nice to have had a couple more $100,000 to do more of them. So not to minimize the point, I think that once you look at the list of these houses, once we can apply this sort of the objective view to it, I think most people would say they would all make sense one way or the other. So it's gonna be more about, choosing amongst a really good choice, a good batch of people to help out.
Thank you. Council, any questions? Any other questions, discussion like to have? Not looking forward to this.
It's a tough one.
It is going to be a tough one. Okay, Council, we are on 8G on 8F on your agenda, 8G on the updated agenda. This is Prospect Heights update. Going to go into a little bit more, and if it's too late, Council, I can do this another time. It's up to you. You guys, everyone okay? Okay. Just checking, so just giving you next slide, just giving you the Prospect Street Heights update. It's been about 6 months since we really revisited this project, so I just thought I'd say a lot of this is a bit redundant. You heard some of this 6 months ago, some of it is an update. A lot of folks still don't know exactly what it is. It's a residential development project located in the vicinity of Prospect Street, Countryway, and Fecto Circle. Consists of 37 acres of undeveloped land. The parcel was originally designed and engineered to support the development of primarily single-family housing. The project received local approval in 1991. The subdivision plat was recorded in the City of Barre land records. Flash forward quite a number of years. Obviously, the design and infrastructure will need to be re-engineered now to today's standards in order to conform with today's land use, water supply, wastewater, stormwater standards. Preliminary project costs that we have received is roughly estimated at roughly $6 million. And the preliminary indications are that the project would result in approximately 50 single-family home lots. Keep in mind, under our current zoning regulations, a single-family home lot can actually support a duplex, a triplex, or an accessory dwelling unit, and 2 larger multifamily lots of clusters, which would support 32 and 48 units respectively. So all of this translates to a project that, as envisioned, would support around 128 units of housing. Oh, definitely next slide, that's just a survey. So this will give you a better idea of where the land is. If you look at the little orange triangles sort of on the bottom, little orange squares, that area is actually included. The first row of lots there is actually included in the option. That previous slide was the actual survey. But some of those little red squares, but it gives you a general idea of the volume of the land, the massing of the land that we're dealing with. And then I showed you where Countryway is there, sort of right on the top, where Berlin Street, we heard from some residents of Berlin Street, obviously a few weeks ago, and where that Berlin Street intersection is, that middle arrow shows that, and Prospect Street, we're showing where Prospect Street is. So this particular parcel can be accessed by Jake Street. Prospect Street, coming directly off of Prospect, would simply be too steep. But you could come off of Jake Street, and you can also come off of Countryway to access it. Next slide. So what we've accomplished, so we populated Prospect Heights Development, Inc. We populated a board of directors. Members currently include representatives from the City of Barre, the Town of Barre, Barre Area Development, Central Vermont Medical Center, and Down Street Development. The City of Barre, obviously, we are the lead project participant. PHDI and the City of Barre exercised a memorandum of understanding on March 12th, 2024, which is when you were last updated. And that MOU outlines responsibilities of the party. At the time, we did that primarily because the board of directors of Prospect Heights Development, Inc. was contemplating being the lead applicant on the Northern Borders Regional Commission grant. And then when we figured out that we would have a stronger application if the city of Barre was the lead applicant, Prospect Heights Development, Inc. is actually a nonprofit that we formed. So PHDI sort of took a back seat and let the city take the lead, but with the understanding that especially after the flooding, our city staff had a lot of things to do. So they've sort of stayed in the driver's seat. It has been and I think Nicholas would agree, it's been a great working relationship. So we negotiated a purchase option with Fecto Residential. The option price is $330,000. The option price was $1,000. That was paid directly by PHDI. As part of the MOU that I referred to earlier, the rights under the option agreement were transferred to the city of Barre, and the option period expires on March 15th, 2025. In '24, the project was named #1 on the Central Vermont Regional Planning Commission's regional priority list. Project has secured roughly $2.9 million in funding pursuant to a Northern Borders Regional Commission or NBRC grant. That was huge for the city to receive that, because if you think about development projects, think about your own home projects, think about buying a home, think about buying a car. Imagine how much more comfortable you'd be if you literally had 50% of the total project cost, price of your home or price of your car. So that was huge for this project. Project recently applied for and expects a formal award of $60,000. That was an ACCD community development grant on November 13th. We've got some additional information to get them, but we're hoping for a formal award on November 13th, 2024. And then lastly, you heard about this from Pat Moulton and others. The project has also applied for and is being considered for an EPA community change grant that would fund additional project costs. So in addition, PHDI has released an RFP for design and engineering proposals. We received 3 very strong responses, and those are currently in review. As if Janet doesn't have enough to do, she actually sits on that review team. Mr. McKenzie, former city manager, was actually conflicted out because Du Bois and King is one of the respondents. So the draft project timeline, November of '24, the selected consultant will be chosen and a contract will be drafted and executed. Winter, spring, '24-25, that's when we'll do the engineering and what everyone is referring to as due diligence completion. That's really the delineation of wetlands and essentially being able to map the neighborhood to see where the lots will be located. Summer, fall of '25, we'll have construction-ready plans and permitting. January, February of '26, we'll have the bid process and the bid award. And in spring of '26, we will break ground for completion in the fall of 2026, which is necessary because the NBRC grant expires in '27? 27. So currently, the hope is that this project would be completed, and which wouldn't mean that you could actually build homes prior to completion, because obviously you don't turn on the water all at once. So obviously the streets are built in phases, so there is a possibility that there could be some home construction going on in 2026 as well. So the next slide just shows you, this is a draft project development outline. It just shows you, and I think Councilor Stockwell, I think you had the question, well, how is the city going to do this? Obviously, it's a daunting task, but it's a necessary task. We need housing. So this just shows over, in '24, '25, '26, the period of construction, what the absorption might look like, what the construction timeline might look like, and how, if we did not receive additional funding, and I think this project is going to be a very strong contender for additional funding, given the fact that we have roughly 50% of the project costs covered. But if we receive no additional funding, and even if the city of Barre said, look, we're either going to do it on our own or partner with someone, even with additional borrowing and with the anticipated lot sales, the borrowing is repaid. It's short-term borrowing in order to complete the project. And actually, under this scenario, the project results in earnings of about, or profit, if you will, although I don't know that the city's in the business to make profit on housing, of $814,000. So what the city could do with that $814,000 is actually offer grants to people. So someone who is at X percentage, in terms of income level, we could say if you have this percentage, you pay the full price of $65,000 a lot. If you're at this income level, so there's a lot of possibilities, which is why I left the $814,000 in there, because we could use that for a variety of mechanisms. So next slide. And just to give you an idea of what the lot sales might look like, obviously you wouldn't start selling them until 26, until the project is well underway. There's going to be an absorption period. I used a 3-year absorption period. It could be, I think, given the demand on housing, I think the absorption period, usually rule of thumb, is 3 to 5 years. I took the lower of the two because obviously there's a huge demand for housing. And it shows, obviously, at the top there where I show 2 lots at 300,000, that seems like a huge number for a building lot. Keep in mind, those are for the 32, and those are for the larger building lots that will support 30 and 40 units. So obviously those lots, because it's a clustered type development, those lots would be much more expensive. The single duplex quad, using the numbers that I used, and keep in mind, I will guarantee you that these numbers will change. Hopefully they won't change by more than 10 to 15%, but they will absolutely change. That would translate into about approximately $65,000 per lot. In terms of the property tax revenue, which is what you thought I was going to do just all along, for the city of Barre, this is pretty huge. Annual, once the project is complete, and you have to make some assumptions. So the assumption I made was an assessment of $225,000 per housing unit, which I think is reasonable. Multifamily, the larger multifamily, would probably not be assessed at $225 a unit, but the single family homes would probably, sadly, because of the run-up in real estate prices, would probably be assessed at more than $225,000. So I averaged it out. It would translate into roughly $29 million worth of grand list growth for the city of Barre, which would translate into about $600,000 in annual revenue. That's municipal revenue only, not education. Obviously, education would be more, but it would translate into $600,000 of revenue for the city of Barre. If this project were completed today, we would not have been so sad pursuant to your to your 26 budget forecast. So that's in a nutshell kind of where we are. It's an exciting time. It's going to be a little bit of a quiet time because we're choosing a consultant and mapping wetlands and doing due diligence and designing lots. Yes.
So without mapping wetlands, you don't really know if you can get 128 units yet. So it's sort
yes,
of like.
we do. We can get
it's an infinite
128
maybe.
units. You go up.
Okay, that's a possibility. So I wonder if we could compare that to 128 units in the downtown where there's already the infrastructure. Like what would be the relative costs?
Well, we don't have a Northern Borders Regional Commission grant, $3 million grant for 120. And I'm not quite sure where you would put 120. I mean, we're doing a 30 plus on Seminary Street. That project is 30 plus units. That is new construction. Very expensive. Listen, I'm a fan of infill development.
Great.
But there is nothing in our zoning regulations that prevents accessory dwelling units or conversion of, a building to a duplex. Or, I could point out a number of lots throughout the city that are ready for development right now, but people aren't developing on them. And why? I don't know.
One question, could we do a perimeter walk? Could council have a perimeter walk of the property?
Of course, I'm sure. Yeah.
I think that would be interesting.
We could do that. Let me see if I can arrange that. Obviously, we have an option on the property. We don't own the property. I'm sure The Fectos have been very, very accommodating. I'm sure they'd have no issue with the city council. And for those who, some of you may care to do a perimeter walk, some of you may not. So maybe what we'll do is we'll do that, and then we'll probably we wouldn't do it at 6 because it gets dark so fast. So we'd probably, maybe do it on a weekend, early afternoon. It is getting colder, so we'll do that.
Sounds great.
Yes?
Hopefully, we're gonna have snow soon, too. I realize this is a little bit of a future projection, but do we have a sense of increased cost to the city in terms of upkeep on the infrastructure that we'd be building for these properties, and how that would sort of play into the grand list? I recognize that it's going to still be a net. I'm just curious what the impact is.
Yeah, it would, I mean, in terms of infrastructure maintenance, you mean plowing?
Plowing, repaving of the roads once they get there, replacement of what, I realize it's all gonna be new now,
Yep.
but in 20 years, we're gonna have to start replacing the pieces that we're putting in now.
Correct. And, water and sewer lines that will net approximately 100,000 a year. So, yeah, we could certainly come up with that as part of the, I can tell you, it's going to be a huge net. I mean, this project is a no-brainer. With 50% funding, and I think that Pat and her team, working with Angie, made a very strong case for additional funding. So I suspect this project will only get better. But we can certainly get you those numbers. Yes, anything? Oh, yes, Amy Gelford.
I can just speak, as I'm going through right now, replacing my old water service line, that broke. That is on a 1911 main. The brand new water mains and service lines are not the ones that are costing money on the infrastructure. And for my day job, we have to look at the useful life estimates for things like water mains, and typically nowadays they're in the 75 to 100-year range. And I don't think our 1911 water main was meant to last this long, but sometimes they do last surprisingly long.
Thank you. Yes.
Question about the, so these are primarily single-family homes. That's what the expectation is, 50 single-family homes, and then 2 larger multifamily lots of clusters supporting up to 32 units and 48 units. Will those larger clusters, I'm sure based on the due diligence that you're going to do, will those be, like apartments and townhomes, and that's an ownership potential as well? Or is that rental?
There could be even the single-family homes. I mean, the one thing that we didn't do, which is why, the question of 128 units, that we assumed single-family homes on the single-family home lots. You could do quads, you could do duplexes, you could do triplexes, you could do houses with accessory dwelling units. So that's why I'm fairly confident that even given, I mean, if you've been doing this long enough, you can look and see where the wetlands are. It's never a surprise. It's just a question of an engineer has to delineate them. A layperson can spot them, but we can't, obviously, if you're not a certified engineer, you can't delineate them. So we feel fairly confident in terms of, and the possibilities. I mean, we've talked to folks who have developed traditional market rate single-family homes and cluster developments. We've talked to Downstreet about how they might develop them. So there's really no, it's not a cookie-cutter approach. It's a neighborhood like most of the neighborhoods you find in Barre. Some, there are neighborhoods where the majority of the homes are single-family, and there are majorities where they're half and half. And there are neighborhoods where they're virtually all multifamily. So there's really we haven't defined like sort of a cookie cutter approach. We just looked at the massing and said, well, based on the preliminary design, this could support townhome style homes. Personally, I'm really big on senior housing. I think we need some good market rate senior housing for seniors who are for some of our seniors who are currently living in 3 and 4 bedroom homes, and they don't need a 3 or 4 bedroom home. They don't really want a 3 or 4 bedroom home, but they don't feel that if they want to stay in the city, they really have an option.
But along that point, I think to Counselor Stockwell's point, I think senior housing downtown would make more sense for people who might not have transportation. I think about with my mother-in-law, when we basically said, you're not driving anymore. And then we had to do all of the doctor's appointments and the grocery shopping. And if there was a way for us to have those things in the downtown and seniors living in the downtown, then everything would just be walkable for them, which would be ideal.
It would. I'm not aware, I mean, we're doing Seminary Street, so I'm not aware that the city would be able to acquire the property. I mean,
I understand that. No, I'm thinking in the sense of, is there something that we as a council can do to encourage, incentivize more infill residential in our downtown? So, and I don't know what that looks like. I'm just spitballing here. So
It's
how
tough.
do we do that? So
I
we
am
can
doing it,
encourage.
and let me tell you, it's hard.
Right, well,
We're planning it now, we're permitting it now, and let me tell you, it's hard.
and I read an interesting opinion piece today, I think in VT Digger, and they were talking, that the person that wrote in was talking about, I think, Austin, Texas and Minneapolis. Did you read it as well? And it was a great article, but it's bigger than us, and I think it's going to take some legislative lifting to help us. But I'm curious if we can leverage some money and use that as incentives to get people to say, hey, we need to develop these commercial spaces, these downtown spaces that aren't full of workers anymore because they're all working from home now. So how can we reuse this space in a productive way?
I agree.
May-
I mean, it's not, as far as I'm concerned, first of all, I've been beating the downtown drum for 25 years. I've developed housing in our downtown, one of the few who have. I'm currently developing housing in our downtown, one of the few who are. So I understand and I agree. And I've always believed that the key to a successful and vibrant downtown is just put people there. So at night, they walk downstairs and they go to a restaurant, or maybe the stores stay open a little later and they have a coffee in the sun on a Saturday. I've always believed that. It's not the easiest development to do. And if you look at, many of the buildings are privately owned. I mean, there's a few buildings in downtown, if I could wave a magic wand and the city could all of a sudden acquire them, I'm sure we all would vote for that. It's unfortunately, not that easy. And the strategy, among others, again, I'm still a big fan of downtown development, infill development, but we also need housing. And having lost 50, Nicholas, give or take, 50 units of housing pursuant to flooding was a real loss for the city. And so even the 128 really doesn't net to 128. We lost 50 on the front end. So for me, it's about how do we put ourselves in a position where we can build the most housing possible, build quality housing, build a neighborhood. And believe me, it doesn't mean for a minute that I've given up. I've spoken with folks in the legislature about ideas that I have that would make infill development easier, make it less expensive, buy the cost down. So I, for one, have by no means given up on it. Yes.
I would submit we need to do both and, honestly. Thank you for more of the details on this project, and I think it looks great. We're going to add housing to the city, and we need to keep encouraging that downtown infill investment. The Housing Task Force has been working with CVRPC on that. We saw the initial analysis for infill development. We saw that at council, but they've now done an analysis of next steps, and the All In for Barre Housing Task Force is looking at outreach around that for how people can split lots, how they can add ADUs to lots, how they can be, build more on existing lots in that downtown core. So I think we're going to see useful movement on that in the near future. That's going to empower individual property owners, not even just so much developers, but individual property owners to add housing to their individual properties. So I look forward to seeing that.
That would be great. I mean, we'll be having more of these conversations. The point here was just that this project is well underway. I feel good about where the project is, what we've accomplished. I'd feel even better if we were able to score another $1 million or $2 million in funding, but we'll see. But our next conversation really shouldn't be about Prospect Heights. It should be about the North End and where we are there. I don't feel like we've made a lot of progress on infill development at all. We talk a lot about things, but we don't do anything. So I'd really like to, turn our focus to other areas in the city, especially in the North End, where we've had some conversations, and now, a year into this, or 6 months rather, into this second flooding event, I think we're in a position where the picture has become a little clearer, and we can maybe start having better conversations about what we hope to accomplish in the North End. So that's what I'd like to do. So that will be next. Upcoming business, council, anything you'd like to see? We will likely be focusing on housing.
Yes, I would like to know where we are with priorities for the Central Vermont Regional Planning Commission. I know they've reached out to us about priorities. I'm hoping that downtown development would be one of our priorities. So I don't know where we are with the priorities. And I know that the infill study is well underway, and I know it's going to come to council at some point soon. The infill.
Well, preliminary did, and then they still have to work out the very specific lots,
Right,
which I don't know how much of that can be
public.
public
Right.
versus an overview.
Good point. I'd also like a TIF update at some point, because I know they've been working, but I don't know what they're working on. I'd love to hear sort of like here's where we are.
I can, I think that we can provide an update. I'll talk to Carol about what the right timing of that is. I know we have our fall monitoring visit coming up, so we can probably tie it in with that. On the priorities list, I know that, we do have to submit like tangible projects, so I know.
You couldn't just say downtown
That,
development.
right, so I think that's our.
I'm hoping to submit the North End. That's what I think.
How about
Central
the
Vermont's regional.
North Seminary Street project
What about it?
as a priority?
Met with DEW a couple of days ago. They're programming it now. I'm not sure that in terms of Down Street, I'm not sure. Funding's always a challenge. It's not like money falls out of the sky, but I'm not aware that I've heard that.
Yeah,
there are any specific like funding challenges. So they've done their site visits. I think they're doing borings.
Yeah, they're in great shape. I think that that project is also part of several applications as well. So I think that they're looking at a mix of funding that they're in, including some CDS. I think this was one, I'm looking at Tess, I think this was one of our CDS applications as well, which I know is maybe less certain at this point, but so they haven't asked for any specific, doesn't mean we couldn't look at, but I don't know that they haven't identified a need for that pot as well. They are, as the mayor said, they're, we've been meeting on site with them, and I believe I mentioned we're looking at like the point of the project, of the drawings, where we're making sure the tower truck has enough radius to turn. So that's how detailed they are. And we're also we're waiting for them to get to a clearer point before we can come and show you the drawings. They just want to make sure that those parts of the due diligence are done, because we did extend the due diligence with them last meeting, so. But I believe the application is 1015 for the regional priority list. The only, the issue is it has to be like a specific tangible
Shovel-ready.
project, like Prospect Heights was last year. And so that's what we need to, to get an application in for that.
And I'd like to explore grants for downtown development, particularly around building residential housing. And if we go up, great, go up. It's a good place to go up. And if we are going to buy buildings from folks, that seems like that would be well worth investigating. A couple other things was, I know this is an extremely lean budget year and one of many lean budget years, but I'm still interested in a bus stop that goes across from North Berry Manor. Maybe we could get a grant. I understand it's complicated. It's not a simple thing. And the other thing is that the four-way stop. I know there's a 6-week study that's ongoing, but I hope that we'll talk about the four-way stop at Prospect and Berlin.
Yeah, Brian,
Down the line.
I think Brian's gotten a desktop review started, so we should, once that's back, we'll bring it right back to the council.
I think that's my list.
Yes.
I have one thing. I've gotten a couple of, well, one was sitting on my desk when I got here, and I've gotten an email about, and I've seen it posted on Front Porch Forum, and I was wondering if we could just have a conversation at some point about West Patterson.
Oh, yeah.
Not because I think we are just, have money on the money tree that we can do it, but I think we need to have an explanation about why that continues to be closed and what our plan is to do with it. So that would be helpful for people to understand.
Sure.
Thank you.
Have we ever received cost estimates?
We have some rough cost estimates for that. They would be, they're high. They would be 6 figures all in addition to the so it needs stabilization. It would need new paving. It would need new guardrails, based on everything it's gone through. So it's in, I don't know if you've been down there, it's in pretty rough shape. But obviously the most expensive piece would be the sort of the stabilization to make all of that secure. So, when we look at it, it's a one-way. I know an oft-used one-way, but it is a one-way, and there are other egresses out of that area. Our thinking is that for the investment to return that small a stretch of road back, it's with the other needs we have, it doesn't seem to rise to our list, but we're happy to bring council the information we have on it.
I agree with all those
Yeah,
things. I think
yeah.
just having the conversation
Of
so
course.
that people who are interested, we could say, hey, come and show up at council. We're going to talk about West Patterson.
We're happy to.
And then,
Maybe we put it on a ballot. We've got one coming up in November, put it on as an unbinding referendum.
and if people really want it and they want to pay for it, then hey,
Exactly.
Should have seen Cheryl's face when you mentioned ballot, just.
Oh.
Cheryl's like, no, we're
Sorry, didn't mean to do that. Where are we even at with this agenda? I forgot. We kind of went sideways a little bit. I'm going to call a roundtable. Council Deering.
If you or anyone you know would like to get involved in our school system, I am looking for daily substitute teachers. They are always needed. We are starting to hit a wall where we have not enough staff members to cover the need. So we would love to have our amazing community help out. This is one of those opportunities to put your money where your mouth is. I did that last year, got involved in the school as a permanent sub, and think it's a great opportunity. So please.
Thank you. Councilor Guston.
First, Tess Taylor has been leading good conversations about homelessness in Barre City, and one of the results of those conversations is the setting up of a warming shelter, morning warming shelter. And so I'm going to be tomorrow morning attending the orientation for people to help staff that warming shelter, and I'm hoping to do at least one day a week to help support with that. So if you would like to contribute to that effort, please reach out to Tess. There's going to be a variety of the churches and other nonprofit organizations are helping to support that effort because, as we have discussed a couple of times tonight, it's getting cold out there. And the second is that we have now settled on dates for ward-specific meetings around the flood resiliency plan. I will send this, apologies, council, for not getting it to you by email. It's been extraordinarily busy, but we have Ward 1 meeting on October 16, Award 2 at Spalding, Award 2 meeting on October 21 at the Aldrich Library, and Award 3 meeting on October 23rd at the Labor Hall. So I'm going to make one change to the graphics, send them out to all of you to share in many places. The idea is to react to what, to continue to react to what has been in the flood resiliency plan that has come before council a couple of times now, that has received feedback in a variety of other ways, and this is meant to be another way for people to give feedback so that council can adopt the plan. We're still targeting end of October for that. Should give us a little bit of breathing room. Probably it'll be for formal approval, the first meeting in November. But this will give us clear direction around addressing current and future flooding challenges in Barre City. So, thank you.
Councilor Spaulding.
I was able to attend the Vermont Natural Resources Council Flood Forum, and actually our councilor Amanda Gustin was on it, and it, as well as someone from the Vermont Natural Resource Council, Friends of Winooski, Vermont Dam Task Force, and the Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation. I believe it was recorded, and I think it's on CBTV,
Yes.
and it was very informative and very helpful, and also depressing, and so I would encourage people to watch it. I think there are a lot of good resources. I wouldn't watch it to be depressed, but watch it to get resources, and watch it to get more information, and yeah, it was a great forum. So I'm glad that they were here at the Labor Hall. It was amazing.
Councilor Stockwell.
I'll pass.
Thank you very much. Motion to adjourn would be in order? Oh, I'm sorry. Do you need an
Teddy?
executive session? No.
Oh, what about Teddy? Did he
How
have
about
a-
Teddy and Mel?
Teddy and Mel? for-
Oh, I'm sorry. Teddy, I apologize. I forgot all about you.
Mel's-
All good. That's the first time you've ever said that, Mr. Mayor. No, I will pass, and Councilor Shumbell dropped off.
Super. Well, anybody?
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you.
Second, whoever.
All those in favor?
Hi.
Those opposed? We
Night
are
all.
adjourned. Thank you.
All right, good night.
You know what? I know what I'm going to do.